TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. I have a World War III alert. We got a World War III alert, but before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Who shot this plane down? Was it Russia? Was it NATO? Was it Israel? We got to get into it.
More than 30 people are dead after an Azerbaijan Airlines flight crashed in Kazakhstan on Christmas Day. Miraculously, nearly 30 people survived, including 2 children, after the plane was seen dramatically gaining and then losing altitude before crashing. It was flying in from the capital of Azerbaijan to Russia, but airport officials say the flight was diverted because of fog. The plane then collided with birds and then was diverted to Kazakhstan because of an emergency on board. This is according to a preliminary investigation by Russian authorities. NBC News correspondent Danielle Hamamdjian joins me now. So Danielle, still many questions here. A U.S. official is saying early indications actually point to the plane being hit by a Russian anti-aircraft system. We are about to show some video of the crash, so I want to warn our viewers it is troubling to watch. But Danielle, what more are we hearing here in terms of why this plane went down?
Well, good evening from London, Vicky. Well, what we're learning, and this has been the subject of much speculation over the past 24 hours as more video surfaced, as the testimonies from the survivors also surfaced, that now it appears, according to some industry experts, that indeed this Azerbaijan Airlines aircraft that crashed in Kazakhstan, killing 38 people, could have been caught in the moment that Russia launched its an air defense to shoot down a Ukrainian drone. Now, NBC News spoke to the chief intelligence officer of an aviation security firm, Osprey, which has partnerships with various airlines around the world, as well as contracts with the U.S. government. And they looked at the footage of the wreckage, which appears to show holes as well as damage potentially caused by shrapnel.
Yeah.
They looked at the footage filmed on board the flight as it was still in the air. They examined the airspace at the time of the event, and they also listened to the testimonies of the survivors, who say that they heard a loud explosion and that they saw shrapnel pass through the fuselage in the cabin area. This has led them to believe that this was not caused either by bad weather or by a bird strike, as you mentioned had been suggested by Russian state media. Here's a little bit more about what this chief intelligence officer from Osprey had to say.
Follow-on video examination of the wreckage and circumstances surrounding the airspace security environment in southwest Russia leads Osprey to assess that the flight was likely shot down by a Russian air defense system.
And so that question was put to the Kremlin, and a spokesperson for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, said that the investigation is still underway and that it would be incorrect, he said, to make any hypotheses before this investigation is complete. Vicky.
Well, that's not what
Danielle, as you mentioned, 38 people killed, but nearly 30 people did.
The plane was shot down. Their plane, Azerbaijan. That's not what they said. They said birds brought the plane down, but maybe it wasn't birds. Maybe it was NATO. Maybe it was Israel. Maybe it was the U.S.
Managed to survive this crash. Do we know anything more about the extent of the injuries here?
It is remarkable footage to see some of those passengers stumble out of the crash site on their feet, walking away. We know, of course, that among the dead, there are citizens of Kazakhstan, Russia, and Azerbaijan. Of those who were injured, most of them were taken to the hospital, 11 in intensive care, 2 in critical condition. So it doesn't seem like the death toll will likely rise, at least for now. But some flights are already expected to go back to Azerbaijan with some of the survivors, 14, I think. But worth remembering, 2 of the survivors are children, Vicky. Pretty remarkable.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news.
We start this hour with developing news on the plane crash in Kazakhstan. Reuters is now reporting that 4 sources in Azerbaijan say the aircraft was downed by Russian air defense systems. 38 people were killed when the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crashed in the city of Aktor. Earlier, all 4 of Moscow's airports were closed. They've now reopened, but no reason has been given.
Yeah, Russia closed 4 of their airports in the area because Russia knew some nefarious BS was going on. They didn't close 4 of their airports because their air defenses are shooting at planes. Hell no, Putin knows what's going on, man. They say close them airports in that area. The CIA and Mossad and MI6, the British Special Secret Service, they run around doing BS. But they're trying to change the subject. This all over the news. There's all kind of shit going on around the world right now.
This footage filmed by a passenger aboard the Azerbaijani aircraft shows the final moments before the plane crashed. The man filming the video did survive and is heard praying in Arabic, saying Allahu Akbar, God is great, beforehand. Oxygen masks are seen being released, and a flight attendant is heard calming passengers and urging them to wear their seatbelts. The Azerbaijan Airlines plane was carrying 67 people in all from Baku in Azerbaijan, flying along the western shore of the Caspian Sea to Grozny, which is in the Chechen area of southern Russia. Russian news agencies said the flight was rerouted due to fog, and it came down on the opposite shore in Aktor in Kazakhstan. Let's go to Rob Harris, who's in the newsroom. And Rob, what's the latest then on these reports coming out of Russia that seem to suggest that it wasn't bad weather, it wasn't a malfunction or a bird strike, but it could have been a Russian air defense system that brought the plane down?
Yes, these claims casting doubt on one of those official allegations from Russia that there was indeed a bird strike. And if you see the images of the plane, there did appear to be signs of, from the face of it, bullets or indeed shrapnel that hit the plane. And we are now hearing from the sources in Azerbaijan, talking to the Reuters news agency, believing that Russian air defenses were responsible. They are trying to repel drones from Ukraine as the war does go on. And one of those sources saying that this preliminary investigation is pointing to the communication systems also being paralyzed by electronic warfare systems on that approach into Grozny. Now, this source is very clear to say that no one is claiming it was done on purpose, but it does cast into doubt those claims from the Russian side. And we did see this plane that did veer off course for several hundred miles yesterday when it was heading from the Azerbaijani capital, Baku, to the Russian city of Grozny. Now, the initial thoughts from the Azerbaijani president was the fact weather might be to blame. Then Russia's aviation watchdog did talk about an emergency landing being attempted due to the bird strike. But then this steep descent did was seen before the plane did crash to the ground. Now, it has been a day of official mourning today across Azerbaijan. National flags were lowered, signals sounded from ships and trains, and a moment of silence was observed nationwide. And beyond Azerbaijan as well, there are investigations taking place. One aviation security firm, Osprey Flight Solutions, said that they've actually issued more than 200 alerts regarding drone attacks and air defense systems in Russia during the war. But as for the official word from the Kremlin, they're still saying that the investigation is ongoing, that it should be something that the special aviation authorities should be behind. There shouldn't be any hypothesis at this early stage. So that's certainly the message from the Kremlin. Indeed, Vladimir Putin speaking yesterday, saying that he'd sent the condolences and offered help with the investigation. But from Reuters sources, they are certainly saying that they do believe that Russian air defenses were responsible for the downing of the plane, with 38 of 67 people on board killed. And we have heard from the survivors, some of them who actually were filming the scenes of the plane as they managed to miraculously escape.
Yes, and Rob, we've just in the past few moments only been speaking. The Kazakh vice premier has said today there is no official explanation as of yet, as of what happened. But look, given Russia's situation with Ukraine, given the historic situation in Chechnya itself, which it hasn't exactly been the most peaceful, stable place the past couple of decades, and that's where the flight was heading to, people are inevitably going to ask questions about this being something other than, as I said at the start there, and as you just reminded people, a bird strike or a malfunction of some description. People are going to perhaps zone in on those other possibilities as we are experiencing right now.
Yeah, and one expert I've been speaking to suggesting actually could be questions over the competence of those Russian air defences in terms of dealing with the situation. For many, it will bring back memories as well of Malaysian flight MH17 from 10 years ago. That was shot down over Ukraine. A reminder, of course, that this war has been going on for 10 years. A lot of focus, obviously, on the full-scale invasion for the last 2.5 years, but it shows the precariousness of the region, also why many commercial airlines do avoid these conflict zones.
A few minutes ago, an authoritative military expert and former lieutenant colonel of the People's Militia of the Luhansk People's Republic, Andrei Marachko, stated that over the past 48 hours, Russian troops have significantly intensified their offensive actions in the Kharkiv direction of the front. According to him, units of the Russian army are advancing both in the north and east of the Kharkiv region. Against this backdrop, the soldiers of the 44th Army Corps announced the liberation of the strategically important settlement of Staritsa, southwest of Volchansk. As evidence, video footage was published where it is clearly visible how Russian soldiers hoisting the Russian flag on a radio tower in the center of this settlement. According to military expert Andrei Marachko, the liberation of the settlement of Staritsa by Russian troops caused significant damage to the Ukrainian army. The fact is that the settlements of Staritsa, Grafskoy, and Vilcha cover the city of Volchansk from the west and south. After the liberation of all these settlements by Russian troops, the Ukrainian army units located in the southern part of Volchansk will actually find themselves encircled. However, the bad news for the Ukrainian General Staff and its NATO military advisors did not end there. As it turned out, on December 25 at 7 a.m. Moscow time, advanced units of the group of troops under the designation Zapad entered the settlement of Dureknia and took under fire control the main supply route of the Ukrainian garrison in Kupiansk. Moreover, it is reliably known that immediately after that, the Ukrainian army units fled from this settlement without offering any resistance. The fact is that these Ukrainian army units did not have the additional reserves and heavy equipment that were so necessary for the defense of this settlement. However, the retreating Ukrainian formations did not go far. They occupied the adjacent heights near the settlement, trying to prevent Russian troops from expanding their bridgehead on the western bank of the Oskol River. Thus, the last relatively stable sector of the front of the Ukrainian army began to shake at the seams. And this fact certainly affects the general morale of the Ukrainian soldiers. Now the Russian army is advancing literally everywhere, even where the Kiev regime seemed to have strong defenses. In the east of the Kharkiv region, against the backdrop of the numerous successes of the Russian army on the battlefield, the Russian aerospace forces, together with the missile forces, continue to launch massive and combined missile strikes against military installations and energy infrastructure facilities in Ukraine. So, a few hours ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially announced that on the night of December 25th, a combined missile attack was launched on hydroelectric and thermal power plants in Ukraine, as well as enemy logistics hubs and military facilities. According to the Russian military department, all targets were successfully hit and destroyed. And now, 20 hours after the official statement of the Russian Ministry of Defense, the first details of this missile attack have appeared. As it turned out, on the night of December 25th, Russian forces launched a devastating missile attack on enemy targets in such regions of Ukraine as Kharkiv, Kiev, Dnipropetrovsk, Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Kirovograd, Cherkassk, Khmelnytsky, Poltava, and Vinnytsia. It is reliably known that independent monitoring services have recorded about 50 powerful explosions in these Ukrainian regions. It is noteworthy that during this missile attack, an air alert sounded throughout Ukraine, even in the most remote western settlements. It is reported that within 60 minutes after the launch of the missile attack, the Russian military managed to hit about 20 energy infrastructure facilities in Ukraine. In particular, Russian missiles rained down on thermal power plants in cities such as Sloviansk, Dnipro, Kiev, and Burstin. Moreover, hydroelectric power plants in cities such as Kremenchuk, Svetlovodsk, and Kryvyi Rog were also subjected to missile attacks. Immediately after that, the central, southern, northern, and western parts of Ukraine were left without electricity and heat. Later, at 2 p.m. Moscow time, the second wave of missile strikes began. This time, Russian ballistic and cruise missiles attacked military installations and logistics hubs of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces. In particular, several armories, fuel depots, and places for the deployment of the personnel of the Ukrainian army and foreign mercenaries were hit and destroyed in cities such as Lviv, Poltava, Kharkiv, and Cherkasy. Against this backdrop, I would especially like to mention the missile attack on the city of Kozyatan, in the Vinnytsia region. In particular, Russian Iskander-M ballistic missiles hit a section of the railway, in the area of the locomotive depot and the Kozyatan-Tovarny station. It is reported that the missile strike was carried out at the exact moment when the unloading of the NATO military train was taking place there. It is reported that this train was carrying American ATACMS ballistic missiles, 155mm artillery shells, as well as several dozen Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. According to representatives of the Russian underground in Ukraine, the repeated detonation of American ballistic missiles and artillery shells turned out to be so powerful that Ukrainian firefighters were still afraid to approach the burning train. Judging by the fact that immediately after the destruction of this military train, the Ukrainian army and NATO forces launched a missile attack on crowded places and residential buildings in the Russian city of Lvov, in the Kursk region, indicates that Moscow's enemies really lost a very valuable military cargo. By the way, a missile attack on the Russian city of Lvov has already claimed the lives of 3 young women. According to the acting governor of the Kursk region, Alexander Kinstein, the Nazi regime in Kiev is deliberately launching missile strikes against civilian objects in an attempt to sow fear among Russian citizens. Against this backdrop, He called on the Russian army to punish these criminals immediately. By the way, judging by the abnormal activity of the Russian military at the Engels Air Base and the Kapustin Yar test site, the Kremlin is preparing another crushing blow to Ukraine. It is possible that in the coming days, or even hours, we will once again see the destructive work of the world's most powerful hypersonic ballistic missile Orshnik.
Reports reaching the Open-Minded Thinker news team suggest that a drone allegedly infiltrated Israel's Iron Dome defense system over Ashkelon and struck a power plant within the city's industrial zone, causing significant disruption. The report has not been independently verified, but several news handles on X, formerly Twitter, posted visuals showing what appeared to be a fiery explosion followed by a series of secondary blasts. While some sources speculated that the footage could be recycled from a 2022 attack on Saudi Arabia, preliminary analysis by OMT News indicated that the footage might be recent. If confirmed, this incident could represent a significant escalation in Yemen's retaliatory strategy against Israel and a broader shift in regional dynamics. Ashkelon, located approximately 30 miles south of Tel Aviv,
We don't want that. Look. All right, this is what we want.
Professor Marandi, please talk about, if you could, your reaction to Ansar Allah's announcement that it had down the F-18 fighter jet, which was said to have been downed by friendly fire of the U.S.'s own making, because right now the U.S. and the Israeli regimes are conducting an all-out war, or attempting to conduct an all-out war against Yemen as a retaliation to their successful strikes into Tel Aviv. Could you talk about this and its significance? Because, as you said, with Syria, there was this kind of reprieve and an obvious victory for Israel, regardless of how involved it was or not in it. Now we see that the resistance isn't maybe as dead as a lot of people assumed it was after the fall of Syria.
No, and I think that the Israeli advance inside Syria and the strikes against the country, even though they've devastated excuse me, they've devastated the infrastructure, I don't think it's going to be good for the regime. It's not a smart move because it's only humiliating Jolani, it's humiliating Al-Qaeda because of their indifference, it's humiliating Erdogan, who pretends to support Palestine yet has never done anything and continues to send oil to Netanyahu, cheap Baku oil to Netanyahu to help him run his genocide and continue his genocide. So I don't think it's a smart move by the regime. If I was, God forbid, a Zionist leader, I would not have advanced into Syria. I would have not have carried out all these heavy airstrikes. But of course, Netanyahu is trying to keep the public on his side. And so he does it and looks strong, and that makes him more popular inside Israel. But what it does is that it exposes the regime further, and it causes problems for the people that the Israeli regime helped bring to power in Syria. Yemen, I think I didn't actually read the statement put out by the Yemeni armed forces, but my understanding is that it sort of implied that they fired the drones and missiles at the U.S. warships in a manner to create confusion, and that the Americans downed their own jet. Whether I may be interpreting it wrong, I haven't read the statement myself, and I should have. But whether the Yemeni armed forces downed it or the Americans downed this jet that costs over $100 million each, it really doesn't matter. It just shows it shows the incompetence of the U.S. military, and it shows how difficult it is to deal with Yemen. And it also shows that no matter how much the United States bombs Yemen and murders citizens, which they've done repeatedly, Yemen continues to strike the Israeli regime. It continues to strike ships that break the siege on the Israeli regime, a siege that was put in place as since the Yemeni government, Ansarullah, said that they are implementing the Genocide Convention. And they said that as long as the genocide in Gaza is taking place, the siege will continue. So the Americans have failed in breaking the siege to help the Israelis carry out genocide more easily. That is extraordinary. It shows the resilience of the resistance. Hezbollah is very much intact, very much prepared in case the war goes on. And yes, there are people who've questioned Iran, but as I said before the previous Iranian strike, it is inevitable, and this is also inevitable. The Iranians have calculations to make, especially after the fall of Syria. They have to prepare their air defenses. They have to prepare air defenses in case the Americans do anything foolish. And they also have to prepare their missiles and drones for the Persian Gulf in case the Americans do anything foolish. Because if the Americans enter the fight, the Iranians will have to strike back. And all those tiny countries in the Persian Gulf that have American bases, that would all, of course, lead to the end of oil and gas production in the Persian Gulf, which will lead to a global economic meltdown. But Iran has to prepare itself for all consequences. It has to prepare itself for some stupidity on behalf of the Americans. It has to prepare itself for aggression, another active aggression by the Israeli regime. So its offensive and defensive capabilities are being prepared for any circumstances. And so those who are criticizing Iran, I think they don't recognize the fact that if conflict starts, it can get very messy, and the Iranians have to be prepared for it. And I think that the fact that it's only Iran that's supporting the resistance, it's Iran that's supporting Yemen, or Hezbollah, or the resistance in Iraq, or Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and it was Iran alongside the Russians for the most part that were preventing ISIS and Al Qaeda from planting the black flags on Damascus. I think people should take that into consideration, that Iran is doing the heavy lifting. Emotional responses are not going to help, and I think that we have to see everything and in an objective manner.
Well, both Israel and the United States, deep inside of their military establishments, have already made note about Yemen alone, Professor Marandi. They've said that this is not an enemy that they say, quote, can be easily deterred, end quote. That is nothing like they have fought before. Ansarallah is considered a relatively small movement in the global picture, at least from the eyes of the arrogant American empire and its allies, though, Professor Marandi. So what do you make of these comments in light of the fact that we are in a period where many people are questioning the resolve and resilience of the axis of resistance?
Well, Yemen has showed itself to be extraordinarily resilient, and it is very crucially located. And the terrain is very good for defense capabilities. And Yemen has become the Ansarullah, or what the Americans and the Europeans call the Houthis. They've become heroes across the world, and their resilience will be remembered. And the same is true with Hezbollah, which prevented the Israelis from making any inroads whatsoever. And I think we have to sort of go back and look at what happened in Ukraine for a moment. The Western media, all of them were saying that Russia lost the war, that the ruble, Biden said the ruble will be turned into rubble. And we've been hearing that the Russians are losing the war for almost 3 years now. Yet today, all of a sudden, over the last, I don't know, couple of months maybe, we've seen this sudden shift in the Western media. And suddenly there's an acknowledgement that things are not going well in Yemen, in Ukraine. So 3 years of Russian in Iran, I would have discussions with colleagues in think tanks, and many believe that the Russians were losing because, unfortunately, many Iranian elites they read the Washington Post and the New York Times and watch CNN and read Western think tank material, and they don't seek alternative sources so that they could put everything together. And many of them were misled, and they believed that the Russians were losing the war. And people like myself and others were saying that this is misleading, this is propaganda, and we had a very difficult time convincing colleagues, and we failed to do so. At least I failed to do so in many cases. But suddenly, all of these friends of mine are now seeing the reality being very different from what they're being told. So I wouldn't take anything that Netanyahu or the New York Times or the Washington Post, what they say, very seriously. We saw, for example, 60 Minutes gloating over the pager explosions, which killed innocent people, which blinded children. I put up some pictures of them on my Twitter feed today, which blinded a mother. This is, I wouldn't take 60 Minutes or ABC or NBC or CBS or BBC Sky News seriously. And I think those who support the resistance should remain very resilient, and they should never feel demoralized or depressed. The struggle has ups and downs, and in Iran, we've learned to be patient. You probably know that in Iran, in Iranian culture, the story of the grandson of the Prophet in Karbala is something that Iranians feel very close to, and how he stood against the despot of his era to support the people, and he said no to humiliation. And then when he and his companions were all murdered, they took his sister to the representative of the despot, and he said, how do you see things now? How do you feel? He was trying to humiliate her. And she said, I saw nothing but beauty. In other words, their martyrdom, their resistance was beauty in a sense, because resistance is something, legitimate resistance for a greater cause is something beautiful. So the horror of Gaza is something that pains us every day, but the fact that so many people, the axis of resistance, are sacrificing for the people of Gaza is something very beautiful indeed. So we have to have patience. We have to keep active. We have to remain active. We have to wake people up and We see that the Western media has put aside Gaza completely for obvious reasons. So of Western regimes, we have to make sure we're reminding people day and night that the Holocaust continues in order to further destroy the regime and to humiliate those who support the regime. So I do not share the pessimism of some, and I think that we have to all learn to have more patience. And we really don't have time to be dejected. We have too many. All of us have too many things to do. It's quite clear that the Israeli regime has scored success in Syria. It is a victory of sorts for the regime. There's no doubt about that. And we have Biden and Erdogan to thank for this success. And I know that some are celebrating what happened in Syria, but I think it's quite clear that the side that won the most by far is the Israeli regime. And I don't think we need to go into much detail about that. But that was the objective all along. The dirty war in Syria began in 2011 with the support of terrorist groups and terrorists from across the world in order to bring down Syria to strengthen the Israeli regime. That was the objective from day one. And although they failed in many ways, they failed to take Lebanon and they failed to take Iraq. But ultimately, after 13 years, Syria did fall to Al-Qaeda. But I think already people are beginning to see things differently. Those who I think were more naive, or those who still believe that the fall of Syria was it's better to have the Israelis celebrating and to have the Syrian government fall. Those who think that the Israeli celebrations are worth it, I think gradually many are beginning to see the reality. They saw how the regime and the Americans began a huge wave of bombings across the country that continue, and the destruction of the country's military and much of the country's critical infrastructure, the occupation of territory, key mountains and water resources for Syria by the Israeli regime, and the fact that Erdogan and Giuliani have done nothing about it raises a lot of questions. And the abuse that minorities, Christians especially, as some of us have seen the footage. This is beginning to things are beginning to become clearer for those who are, I think, those who've been deceived. But in any case, it is a victory for the Israeli regime. I don't think it's necessary to hide that. But I'm not quite sure if it's a long-term victory, because the fall of Syria will have implications across the region. And the countries that are most vulnerable to these extremist groups are, ironically, almost exclusively in the American camp. So there's no doubt that Saudi Arabia is very uncomfortable about the current situation. There's no doubt that Jordan and Egypt are uncomfortable. In fact, last night, apparently, the so-called revolutionaries in Syria, these Al-Qaeda militants and their allies, they were spreading footage of unrest in Egypt, old footage, and pretending as if this was happening. It was happening last night. And some say it was because they were trying to hide the protests that were taking place in Syria. But that aside, the very fact that they are targeting Egypt and putting up old footage of unrest in Egypt, means that these Al-Qaeda militants have objectives that go far beyond the borders of Syria. And at the same time, they have huge challenges in Syria. Syrians are uncomfortable, especially about the foreign fighters. And the minorities, which combined constitute half of the country, are all concerned. The Kurds, the Christians, the Alawites, the Shia, the Druze, and many Sunnis, educated class, and people across of all walks of life. They are concerned. So they already have problems. They have there's fighting going on in the areas controlled by the Americans and the Kurds, and or their Kurdish proxies. And Turkey and Qatar have to fund Al Qaeda. The financial burden is on their shoulders. Until now, Iran was sending 60, on average, 60 to 70,000 barrels of oil a day to Syria. Iraq was sending 120,000 barrels of oil a day. The Russians were sending the equivalent of 50 or 60,000 barrels of oil. The Russians were sending refined different fuels, which is even more costly for them. And then, of course, the grain that the Russians were sending, the other support, medicine, and hospital equipment that the Iranians were sending in as aid, that has discontinued. So this huge financial burden for Iran, for Iraq, and for the Russians has ended, and now the burden will be on the Turkish government to deal with a country that is in ruins, thanks to the dirty war that Mr. Erdogan helped initiate along with the West and others. So Syria may face changes in the future. It's not clear what will happen, who will control the country. And at the same time, as I said earlier, countries in the American camp are vulnerable, or countries that are seen as being a part of the American camp, they're vulnerable. But this may not end well for Americans. And if it doesn't end well for the Americans, it definitely doesn't end well for the Israeli regime. And we have to keep in mind that the United States is very busy in Europe. The war is not going well, and the Russians are making rapid advances in Ukraine, and it doesn't seem like Trump is going to be able to end the war on day one, as he promised to do. And the Americans are facing challenges with China, with Panama, and with Canada and Mexico, and all sorts of problems at home. So I don't think it's very smart for the Israeli regime to be celebrating too much. But the reality is that Netanyahu's celebrations are basically so that he could remain in power. Otherwise, I believe that what Netanyahu has done over the last year has delegitimized the Israeli regime in the eyes of the international community. It's shown it to become very weak. Just over the past day, a number of Israeli troops were killed in Gaza, and Yemen has struck again, as you pointed out. And in Lebanon, things are sensitive, very uncertain. The Israeli regime yesterday used a drone to kill 2 ordinary citizens in southern Lebanon. They are constantly violating the ceasefire, as you pointed out, but it just shows that the regime is in trouble. And the Iranians will ultimately punish the Israeli regime. And as I said before, the Iranians are not going to let the Israeli regime to get away with its airstrike on Iran.
Zelensky's caught in a bribery scheme up to 500 euros, 500 million euros. And a bribe. What is the bribery scheme? The bribery scheme. The bribery scheme is that Zelensky wanted into NATO, so he was going to bribe this guy with 500 million euros. That's what he said. So let's listen to it. You can turn it down a little, and He said, I was surprised by such a reaction from Zelensky. I was surprised by Zelensky's reaction. That in the principle, any option that Ukraine would transit gas via any of the routes was ruled out. Because there is still an opinion that any route, if it passes through Ukraine will carry Russian gas. Again, that's what this whole thing is about. There's several things. One was it was about weakening Russia so they could overthrow Assad in Syria and give part of that country to Israel, which is what they're doing.
Well, Turkey was in on it too.
And Turkey was in on it. It's all about it. They wanted to put a gas pipeline from Iran through Syria. They didn't want that. They don't want Iran to be able to put a pipeline and give energy to Europe. They wanted that pipeline to come from Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Do you see what's happening? Okay. So that's what he's talking about. And that's why they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. The Nord Stream pipeline carried cheap energy from Russia to Germany. And the United States wanted to sell that gas. And so we are. And now Germany's economy is tanking because they're paying such high price for energy.
Well, you see what he said? If it passes through Ukraine, it will carry Russian gas. That's how corrupt Ukraine is.
Yes.
They don't want it to go through Ukraine because they're still going to buy Russian gas.
That's right. He absolutely ruled that out. Zelensky, he has stepped in with proposals that seem absurd to me. For example, he will agree to transit gas only if we don't pay for it before the end of the war. So he's willing to let Russian gas come through Ukraine to go to Europe only if Europe promises not to pay for it.
How would that even, what?
Right. This is what he's saying.
That's a cokehead. That's cokehead plans.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
What kind of fool would give us free gas? As we were nearing the end of the meeting, Zelensky returned to the topic of gas and asked me if I would vote for Ukraine to join NATO. If he would give me 500 million euros of Russian assets. So with Slovakia, of course, I immediately replied that I would never. You just know my opinion on Ukraine's NATO membership, which is no. And it is strange that he asked me such a question.
Yeah.
Because he knows very well that inviting Ukraine into NATO is absolutely not acceptable.
Yeah.
But we are helping Ukraine. I would expect Ukraine to help us too. Tell me how to explain this to the Slovak public. I'll be thinking about it all Christmas long. So Zelensky sent you, people will tell me, and you will continue to supply him with electricity and send humanitarian aid. I cannot completely rule out that in this situation, we will have to think about retaliatory measures from Slovakia, which will be real. Why would I not do that? If he has decided that there will be no transit of energy from Russia to Europe, so that, God forbid, someone does not get money for their gas, even though the Russians, are still selling the gas, somewhere else, then we have to ask why our countries should have one-way traffic. Why it should only go from us to them? Why can't there be some kind of solidarity towards us? He's saying, why should we give you aid? Why should we give you arms? Why should we give you stuff? But you won't help us. We need that energy.
Because Ukraine is their Israel now.
Yes. So there you go. It's all about, just so you know, it's all about oil and gas. It's all about Israel. That's what's happening in Ukraine. And it's all about balkanizing Ukraine, meaning chopping it up into pieces and selling it to BlackRock. They've already sold half their farmland in Ukraine to BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard. They thought they were going to be able to do the same thing to Russia. They thought they were going to be able to put such a hurt on Russia economically that people would overthrow Putin, and then Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street and the economic hitmen from the West would come in and carve up Russia and sell it off. That's what they thought. It didn't work. Russia got even stronger now than they were before, and they started combining with China, which is the last thing that if you're in the West you would want.
They don't even like each other, and we pushed them together.
And we pushed them together. And here it is. Here's the big bribery. Zelensky caught in a 500 million euro NATO bribery scheme. And that's from Robert Fico, the Prime Minister of Slovakia.
Yeah.
And why did Zelensky think paying off Slovakia would help in the first place? I mean, I don't think all this hinges on Slovakia. I'm just saying, I think Kamala Harris paying 6 times to recreate the set for Call Her Daddy podcast for 6 times the cost of the original set, that was probably a better use than the money paying off Slovakia. That's all I'm saying.
Their vote is, what are they, the George Clooney of NATO that makes the final call?
And this is the same guy who got shot, right? Isn't this the same guy who got shot?
The guy that I said somebody wants to get shot because he was going to investigate Pfizer.
Because he announced he was going to investigate Pfizer and the COVID.
Ukraine something.
Yeah, and then he immediately got shot
by a 72-year-old man with no history of violence. And I was like, oh my God.
Wow. I miss the old sweet Zelensky days when he just wore a rubber suit and high heels and danced for money.
You know, the guy, say what you will about him, he plays piano with his dick.
So you're telling me Zelensky, the leader of the human trafficking, organ trade, and money laundering hub of the entire world, is offering a bribe?
And not to the right people?
And not to the right people.
Do you think that Slovakia, I still don't get what and they're giving him electricity and what else? And they have to not have gas. Well, like he knows the reason why is because America and England and Europe, you know, the more prominent NATO countries want it that way.
That's right.
That's why he's probably baffled at Zelensky coming to him like he's going to do something. A guy.
Next thing you're going to tell me is Zelensky's scratchy voice is from all the cocaine he's doing to keep himself running ahead of his own conscience.
Yeah.
So if you don't know that all the Russian oil and gas would come through Ukraine to go to Europe. Well, that's why they built the Nord Stream pipeline that bypassed Ukraine and it went directly to Germany. And that's why the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline.
Yeah.
And now Europe and Germany are suffering. Their economy are tanking because they now have to pay double, triple, and quadruple the price of energy.
Yeah.
Since we did that. And they still, for some reason, still go along with the United States and the Western economic hitmen. And I'm guessing it's because they're all being bribed and paid off. And the ones that aren't, or blackmailed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Their governments their coalitions are all collapsing, all of them.
Yes.
All of the WEF.
The WEF.
Tomorrow. Yeah.
They are collapsing.
So that's why. But they can't let go because you don't want them tapes coming out.
Even the UK's prime minister screaming about open border policy was done intentionally. The guy who was cheering it on 4 years ago. Yeah. So their governments are collapsing. And I have a story I'm not going to get to today about how the whole economic system is a scam in Europe right now, and that it's been opaque. And that they haven't. Yeah.
I feel like I know this story already, and I haven't even heard it yet.
For 10 years. Come see us on tour in Los Angeles,
through, but we're going to talk around doing a couple things this morning. And I got inspired to talk about Russia and China. I have really not much to do until for a couple of hours. I had a holiday dinner at my sister's house, so I'm sitting there bored. Football game's 13-7. Let's talk about Russia and China. How about we do that? All right. You know, I got to start here. I got to start at the end. I got to start this story from the end, and that is how surprised I am by people in America. Oftentimes, Americans over the last few years have shocked me, you know, on a number of occasions, and this is one of them. This whole deep state narrative stuff, the contradiction between people who consider themselves so wise, awake, and aware, right? They're red pilled. They got a color for their pill, right? I'm red pilled, or whatever color pill it is. Basically arguing that I now see through the hollow narratives of the neoliberal, neoconservative, imperialist, globalist, whatever term you want to use, these fascists. Fascist works for me, but if any of the other ones seem appropriate, apply them at your leisure. So basically, because conservatives, you know, we're not going to talk about the liberals, but conservatives, socialists, various lefties, etc., who are like, yes, man, when it comes to this deep state stuff, I see through these bastards. They'll never fool me again. Okay. And you talk about COVID. And they say, well, you know, when it comes to COVID, I was suspicious all along, and things seemed a little weird that the way the whole disease showed up. So I had some suspicion that maybe it was from a lab. And what do you know? The government comes out and says, we think it was actually from a lab. And I didn't trust a lot of this stuff. Why? Because I'm red pilled. Because I understand that you can't trust these people about anything. Okay, fair enough. The whole Ukraine comes out, and people are on the same people. They're on, you know, whatever their favorite YouTube show is, and they're, you know, they're in the chat. Yes, I knew the whole thing was a lie all the time. I always never, ever believed that the deep state bastards are telling me the truth. So I looked into Ukraine. I found out about you know, the trade union hall burning of people. I found out about the history of Crimea and all kinds of things, right? Who I can tell you who Viktor Yanukovych and Petro Poroshenko and all of these things, right? So they're red pilled, man. They know what happened when it comes to Ukraine, and they know they're being lied to by the usual deep state warmongers. Okay, it's established. There's a certain group that these are the ones that surprise me that fall right into that category. And then comes China. And the same deep state non-believers who said, yeah, well, when it comes, well, look at history. They lied to us about Vietnam. Do you remember Iraq and weapons of mass destruction and babies out of incubators? They got their history together, and they understand, and they don't trust. And they'll even tell you about 9/11. Yeah, Building 7 was all suspicious. I don't know. The official story doesn't make sense. They're on to everything. And then comes China, the weakest of all arguments, the weakest now. So then comes China. And here basically is how simple it is to set up China, the China narrative. China is a country that doesn't really have a history of violence, pretty much, right? China was an extremely poor country. They had something to offer, though. They had labor, and they had history, and they had unity, and, you know, and they had great culture, and they had cheap labor. They had excellent food. They had cheap labor. So what do you know? Something was going on here. And what was going on was we had a very dark period of industrialization, wherein the billionaires did things like locked a bunch of women in a garment factory in New York. And when the garment factory caught on fire, the women couldn't get out because the owners had locked the doors, so they couldn't take too many breaks. They couldn't take breaks anymore. Like 100 and some women died. And that gave birth to actually a lot of labor laws and things of that nature. But this is the kind of things that was happening, right? Unions were coming up. We got rid of child laborers. labor, we got all of these changes so that, 8-hour days, work weeks, overtime, all kinds of things like that came into account here. And well, the captains of industry didn't like that at all. That wasn't going to work for them. They were good with industrialization. They were good with great sales. They were good with great prices, but they weren't so happy in paying their labor force. If you think about business, you got three principal what we'll call inputs, right? You've got your, let me see if I can remember them. You have labor, you have capital, and then you have, I believe it would be like what was it? You have labor, you have capital. Darn it, I forgot the three. I had Richard Wolff on. Whatever the case may be, here's my point. About this. You don't need to know the three of them to know what I'm saying. So the wealthy owners of capital created a dynamic where in this country, through their ability to control the media and their ability to control the government, where the only part of business that is important is profit. That's it. That's what we focus on. If you make the most profit, if everybody seeks the greatest profit that they can get, every corporation just seeks the greatest profit it can get, then we'll all be better off. I don't know how, but somehow, right? So in the spirit of that economic culture, the titans of industries did what that culture would require them to do. They sought to lower the cost of labor and to raise the amount to increase the profits, which in a culture where business, the entire culture is driven by high profits, it would make sense. They did the logical thing. Certainly something that would hurt the working class and the masses, but logically speaking, if your culture is we should seek the greatest profit we can, this is logical. So there's China. Hey, China. Yeah. Let me add part of this. A lot of people have argued against Nixon opening up things with China as though that he was an individual and blah, blah, blah. And he wanted to do that for any various reasons. I believe that the titans of industry as early as the 70s, what was that, 72, whatever year it was, 70, in that time period, that the titans of industry were saying then, we're paying a lot for labor and we got to give them retirements and all this kind of stuff. Let's start looking around the world for cheaper labor. And they were looking at China then. And when Nixon went over there to open up China, he went over to open up China for cheap labor. And it took them a little while, but once they got the laws they needed passed, they simply said, okay, we're in a country where you've got laws against pollution. You've got laws against exploiting your labor. You've got laws against air pollution, right? And we have to pay our labor well. We'll go to countries where the countries that none of that, they were countries like Vietnam, other countries they moved to, right? Bangladesh, remember that? Probably heard of a lot of the garment factories moving there. So they moved out of a regulated environment. Part of it was the labor's expensive. The other part of it was there's environmental regulations, there's labor regulations, there's regulations. So they move out of a regulated environment to China and other countries in an unregulated environment to increase prices, but it hurt the American people. Pretty simple. And that's where we are now. That's the dynamic. That's why they did it. It made sense based on the culture that they believed in. And so now what we have is an argument that I don't understand why the so-called red pill people could possibly buy, where the same ruling elite are saying basically this: we made a decision to get more profits by moving all of our industry, our capacity to produce, our industrial capacity, moving it to China and other places, but especially China, because we had cheap labor in large amounts, and they were fairly well educated and everything, and they were really cheap. That's why we moved it. And it caused us to make a tremendous profit, more so than ever. And it dramatically hurt the working class people here. Those things are all true. And now they say, and China is evil and they must be stopped. China's evil. and they must be stopped. And how are you going to stop them? Well, they're setting up for war with China, which would stop everybody because it's going to end in a nuclear conflict and kill us all, number one. But number two, they are doing all of these tariffs. Okay, we're going to hurt technological sanctions and all these things they're doing to hurt China. China is their own creation. They did it. They moved everything there because of a culture that says we must get as high profits as we possibly can, and it worked. However, there were some, shall we say, unforeseen circumstances that arose as a result of their decisions. That was the Chinese people are very resourceful, hardworking, and they unified and they came up with ways to leverage their newfound finances and access to technology. Should be expected. And what did they do? They grew. Well, you knew if you moved all your industry there that it was going to grow. But now China has to be the enemy. We have to go after China, stop China at all costs. China's bad. China's evil. China's the worst. Oh, look what they're doing to their people. Look what they're doing to the Uyghurs. Look what they're doing. Remember Peggy, somebody or other, was a tennis player. Oh, she's missing. Oh, they're doing this in the South China Sea, the Philippines, North Korea. It became the new Ukraine lie. It became the new Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. The new Putin is an evil dictator. That's what it became. It became the latest garbage, trash, lying, deep state narrative to drag us into war so that our children could all die on a foreign battlefield. And we could be impoverished, meanwhile, through their sanctions / tariffs war on China. And we can all suffer, as which we already are with what is now inflation. But if it continues, if you go after the number one economy in the world, you're going to have stagflation, and eventually you're going to have hyperinflation. And we're supposed to suffer that because they don't like the outcome of their decision to move the industrial capacity to China, of the United States, of the entire West to China, so that they could make more profit. And they were successful and they made more profit. And now they want to go up and demonize and beat on China. And we got a bunch of people who say that they're red-pilled or whatever the hell, and they understand the lies about everything. You go all the way back, every war, everything you can tell them, they know they were lied to. They're very, very suspicious about lab leaks now, and suspicious about everything except one thing. When it comes to China, those same brilliant minds now will go right along. Oh, Biden is the worst president ever. He's liars. Those neocons are crazy. But you know, for some reason, when it comes to China, he hit the nail on the head there. Imagine that. And Trump and Biden disagree on everything. Biden's the worst president ever. He's lying. He's taking our rights. He's using lawfare. Everything Trump brings up against Biden, which a lot of it I would agree with. Some of it he says I wouldn't. But I think Biden is easily the worst president this country's ever had. And if you take every bad president we had and stack them on top of each other, he's a million times worse, exponentially worse than all of them, in my humble opinion, for a number of reasons. But everything, according to the Trump people, the MAGA people, and even all the way up to Trump, that Biden's did was wrong, except one thing. He hit the nail on the head when it comes to China. Isn't that interesting? Oh, and Israel, Zionism. That tells you something, so-called red-pilled people who are so wise. Look, the things that they disagree with on, I'd simply say, look at them with a jaundiced eye and try to figure out what's what and who's using an angle. But the things they agree on, that's where the deep state and the ruling elite are unified. The deep state and the ruling elite are unified on everything to do with Zionism. The deep state and the ruling elite are unified against Iran. The deep state and the ruling elite are unified against Venezuela, which you might notice one thing that's interesting, and that is that Venezuela has more oil reserves than any country in the world. But surely that has nothing to do with it. They wouldn't it was about Venezuela like they did about everything else, right? And the deep state, more than anything, is unified. Well, not more than Zionism, the same, is unified that we have to go up against China. Now, I would argue this. I would argue that the knuckle draggers with Biden want to go to war. I would argue that Trump and the techies, right? Trump and the techies, I'll call them, the Peter Deals of the world, the Musks of the world. They don't see China as something to go smash with because they got a lot of investments there. The techie people like that, libertarian techies, that's who's got the White House, like it or not, but brother, the libertarian techies who are, they use libertarianism, which, you know, I have no really economic agreement, especially philosophical. I have a lot of disagreements with libertarian ideology, but I have a lot of libertarians that are good friends and great people because I respect their right to have a different ideology than me, number one. And number two, they're generally anti-war, although some of them even buying into the China crap. I don't know why. You explain to me, nobody can explain to me really so far. I don't know, maybe people can help as to why people who, I mean, are even hip to anti-Zionism, you know, they're like, look, the Russiagate stuff was all lies. This is lies, that's lies. Oh yeah, they won't tell the truth. What about the SS Liberty, blah, blah, blah. Everything. Then you get to China. Well, what about China? Well, now them damn Chinese, they're really up to something. We got all die for Taiwan and the Philippines and the South China Sea. Yes, sirree. We might all have to, the entire planet may have to be fried in a nuclear confrontation over a country with over an island with less people than the state of California. Yes, sirree. I'm willing to give up everything I've ever had. What do we need human beings on this earth for? If we can't have a country, an island that the United States State Department officially recognizes as part of China, why we might have to fight China. What is China going to come and say, hey, we were kind of looking out there at the bottom of Florida, and you got some little islands sticking out there. You call them Keys. Key West. We think Key West is no longer part of the U.S., and we're going to start shipping weapons into Key West so that they can defend themselves from the evil U.S. And we're, you know, seeing that 7-mile bridge between the Keys, we're going to send some ships and sail in between just to show that it's international war. No, you don't see China's not doing that. So the U.S. is doing all kinds of terrible stuff, but for some reason, people, it's not the deep state that I blame. Hey, they're going to do what they're going to do. I just don't understand the so-called open-eyed, knowledgeable people who are 100% down with the deep state for this one particular project, the most evil of them, right? Let's talk about China and Russia a little bit and the deep state narrative, right? So the deep state narrative is that Vladimir Putin's a dictator, an evil dictator who oppresses his people. They need to be freed from him. And of course, President Xi and the ChICOM, the Chinese Communist Party, however, are there. But here's what's interesting about both of them. Number one, according to U.S. polls prior to the last election in Russia, according to U.S. sponsored polls, Vladimir Putin had an 86% approval rating, and he got 87% of the vote. And afterwards, they said, you know, he did terrible and nefarious things. Yeah, well, I don't know what he did, but it only netted him an additional 1% at the most from the looks of things. According to us, he went out and did terrible things, cheated in the election to go from 86% to 87%. Or you could think like me and say, isn't 1% probably within the margin of error? I'm guessing that his victory was within the margin of error. So it's kind of hard, but it didn't matter. And a guy who has an 87%, I mean, his minimal approval rate you got to give him is 87%. And that's a dictator. If that's a guy who like has to tell everybody in the country what to do, I'm thinking if you got an 87% approval rate, you don't really have to be real like authoritarian. 86% of the people approve of you. You can just ask them nicely, hey guys, would you, I don't know, pour me a shot of vodka? Yeah, I think he could probably find 87% of the people in the country that'd be happy to pour him a shot of vodka. So why would he need to be some authoritarian? And how is he an authoritarian? When we thought he'd get 86%. Now let's move over to China. The evil Chinese Communist Party, a government who took 800 million people over like a 20-year period out of poverty. It shouldn't be shocking why those 800 million people may support the government. I would think most likely they would. Might I add, let me add this about China. There is a parallel in that when Vladimir Putin came to power, 1999-ish, 2000-ish, their country was impoverished. They were poor. They were broke. They were humiliated. They had much of nothing. And he took over, and the U.S. was in the process, in the West, particularly the U.S. and the UK were basically robbing them blind. It was highway robbery. They were stealing everything that wasn't nailed down. And Vladimir Putin came in and said, hey, I don't like this. And basically, he's been there, FDR on steroids. He took a Russia that was impoverished, that was broken, humiliated, and he turned it into a very powerful country. And right now, highly respected worldwide. He's a highly respected statesman outside of the West. The West thinks, oh, yes, the world hates him. Yeah, well, if the world means Europe and and the U.S. and its lackeys, then the world and even the people in there don't all hate him. But enough of them have been propagandized to hate him. But the bottom line is this: it's only logical in a country where a leader came into power and the country was broke, humiliated, and weak, and now it's strong and wealthy and respected around the world everywhere outside of the U.S. and its lackeys. Of course the people would like him. He's had success. You know what? I remember as a good, back then it was the Redskins, my team's the Commanders football team. And I remember when there was years ago a running back named John Riggins, and he got a $850,000 a year contract. Everybody, wow, that was a lot. They rewarded you. They showed loyalty. And Riggins said, no, they didn't. They didn't give me that money. Because they're loyal to me. They gave that money because I make touchdowns and first downs. I produce. They paid me because I produce. I mean, that was the reality, right? The people in Russia don't like Vladimir Putin because he has a nice smile or because he likes dogs or anything like that, because he's a good-looking guy. You know, the stuff they talk about in our elections. Yes, this person is tall and he looks manly, or hey, she's a woman of color, blah, 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 right? You vote for a person for these inane reasons. The truth is, the Russian people are very practical and bureaucratic. He produces. They vote for. Makes sense. China, 800 million people out of poverty. They're building stuff in China and everywhere else. They're producing. A lot of the people in the Chinese government at the top are like engineers, nuclear physicists, scientific-minded people. And they sit down and they say, we want a 5-year plan for our economy where we can raise more people into the. They like sit down and they do this. They don't have, let's be honest, they don't have a economy that's based on belief and culture and magic. What happens if every company just simply tries to make as much profit as they can, it'll benefit everybody down to the lowest worker. And if you say, well, really explain to me how, what's the plan? We can't really explain anything to you. We can just tell you that's just the way things work. We don't really know why. It's order by God, I guess. I don't know. And the Chinese sit down there and say, we got a plan. And as really the Russians, their economy is not fully planned, but there are a lot of parts of the Russian economy that are run by the government that work, such as, the military-industrial complex, right? Here's my point. Chinese government, my understanding is 70% of the corporate power is owned by the government, 30% is out into the market. It works for them. Apparently, it actually works very well for them. The Russians have a similar dynamic, but different. And here's the dynamic the Russians have. A lot of their natural resources, gas and oil and very, very other, and powerful commodities that they offer on the market, right? The Russian government handles it, and it's not private. And the Russian government uses that money to run the country, to upgrade things, to pay pensions, to upgrade their military, and their military-industrial complex is, for the most part, it's nationalized. They handle it. So when Raytheon makes a missile for $300,000 and they mark it up to $2 million, the U.S. sells it, they make a lot of money. The Russians make a missile for $200,000. That's just what it costs. There's no, you just add administrative fees and everything together. That's the value of the missile. So they're making it without a profit. So they're able to make more considerably cheaper. That's what China does. So Russia has a money producing industries, which are mostly, from my opinion, from my understanding of it, mostly oil, gas, mining, things of that nature. I'm not sure about wheat. They produce a lot of wheat, so I would suspect the government has at least a hand in on that. So the bottom line is, but here's my point. They're able to produce for the people and not tax them to death in Russia because the government comes up with its own money, right? Produces money through, produces wealth through running company and selling the natural resources of the country. China is able to do similar types of things on a probably larger scale, much larger scale when it comes to certain, the industrial capacity, and they produce for the people, and the people are happy about that. The United States government is not respected. Really, to be honest, one could make an argument, not based on the outcome, whether Trump will be different or not, but one could make an outcome that the United States attempted a revolutionary change. And I don't mean revolutionary in the traditional perspective. I mean revolutionary rather than reform, revolution, rather than try to reform a broken system to try to completely change a broken system, right? And that there are a lot of people that saw they saw a system that produces nothing but war, and they were hoping for Trump would produce something different. They saw a system that in no way responded to the wants or needs of the working class, and they wanted something that would do different. This is not a discussion of whether Trump will, because in most ways, I would argue he won't. Trump is not there to change the system for you, okay? Trump is there to save the system from you. And in doing that, if he has to do a few things that may seem anti-system, he'll do it, but he ain't there. Trump is not here. He is not the executioner, buddy. He is the surgeon. He is here to save it. He's not here to finish it off or change it. People wanted a revolutionary, right, to completely change the system, and they got a reformer. Save the system, tweak the system to save it. He believes in the system. He's rich off this system, and he believes in it. But my point is, as far as all of this together, what we end up with is a pretty obvious dynamic wherein Russia and China are stumbling blocks for U.S. hegemony. The United States wants to rule the world. Russia and China are growing. Russia and China, horribly, are producing for their own people. And the problem is the United States doesn't like any countries that produce. The ruling elite in the US, the UK, that control all of Europe now. For now, I think that's going to change. But they do not like a good example. And I'm not saying either of those countries are perfect. I'm just saying a better example here. And you know what else is interesting is the people who buy into the deep state narrative about Russia and or China also get into this business about freedom. Well, they don't have freedom in fill in the blank Russia or the others China. So I'm supposed to believe that you're concerned with China because of the freedom that the citizens have. How about the freedom to choose their own government and be happy with it? Is that a freedom that's important? Freedom, they can't say what they want on the internet, really? And you think you can? I'm not on Twitter right now. How'd that happen? These videos on YouTube are unbelievably censored. Man, my numbers on YouTube have dropped dramatically in the last month. When I left Sputnik, my numbers soared. I was on all the time, soared numbers. And then just like that, instantly dropped. I have people constantly telling me I've been unsubscribed. I have people telling me I've been unsubscribed 5 times. I have people that tell me I never get notifications. I never see you show up anymore in any of the, right? I'm very, very widely banned on social media or throttled back, shall we say. So anyway, the idea after Russiagate, which was a coup attempt, I'm not 100% they're going to let Trump even become president. And I'm not a Trump supporter or hater. I'm just observing the system. You know, But to argue in this fascist country that's committing a genocide right now, to argue that the Chinese people aren't free, push back against genocide in this country and see if the police don't show up at Columbia University and beat the hell out of the students. The sons and daughters of the ruling elite. This country is so wrecked, it's coming apart at the seams, that you got Luigi coming up, you know, doing the unthinkable deed to the CEO, you know, a guy whose views as representative of the policy of the ruling elite, and the people are in the streets cheering online, cheering, hooray! If you remember the ruling elite, you know they're sharpening up the guillotines, but yet China's the problem. The countries that love their leaders, they're the problem. Russia and China, 87 and 90+% approval ratings of government in China. Those are the problems. We, a country where the people don't trust their government, most people see their government as, you know, a real problem right now, where we look at our government in the world as saying your government is the greatest threat to peace and freedom in the world. That's the way the world looks at the US government and its lackeys. And we have the nerve to look at China or Russia and say they're bad, but their people don't think. So we're going to run a country where the people hate their government, don't trust their government, is going to go to a country that has a 90+ approval rating, 90% plus approval rating, and say, we need to step in and change the way, you need to change the way you do things and do things like us. I mean, practically speaking, the people would be like, but we don't want to do things like you. We're different than you. We have a different culture than you. Oh, by the way, this is going to sound crazy to you, but what we're doing is working quite well. Yeah, that's the problem. It's working quite well for the people there. It ain't working in the Russian people, the Chinese people. Their government is delivering. Their government is answering their pleas. Here, they're giving us the freaking finger. So my point is, all of that comes back to how stupid can people be? How stupid can people be that they can see through every lie except the latest one? You know, these are people that during previous wars, when the government said Saddam had weapons of mass destruction and we got to fight them over there, so we don't have to fight them over here, agreed. Yeah, sure, they were right. And later on, they looked back 5 years and said, you know, I think I was lied to. And now they're buying into the China stuff. And if we somehow survive 5 years, they'll look back and say, you know, isn't that crazy how they lied to us about China? And I'll be like, yeah, isn't it crazy? They lied to us about everything else, including China. Man, who would have saw that one coming? Who could have been possibly wise enough to figure out that they lied to us about every war, that they lied to us about every foreign policy confrontation, that they lied to us about every so-called enemy or dictator that we had? Who could have possibly figured out that after 99,999 lies in a row, that the next narrative would have been false too? That's my point, that I'm talking to people who buy into the anti-China crap. We got to somehow fix China. We have a right. We have a right to whatever we're doing in the Black Sea or the Baltics. And by the way, the South what sea? China Sea. It doesn't say the Gulf of California, the Chesapeake Bay, the Hudson River. No. It's the South China Sea. And we got to go. What do you think the United States would do if suddenly China and Russia sailed on armada into the Gulf of Mexico and said, you know, we've been talking with Mexico and we're going to set up a base. And we're going to put some missiles in that base. And we're going to start building up Mexico's government because they may need to protect themselves. We're going to give billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons. We're going to buy all kinds of stuff for Mexico to be able to protect themselves from the United States. We'll do whatever we want in Mexico. Look, the people of Mexico have a right to choose who they'll ally with. And, you know, the United States has no right to tell that they're going to join the Russia, China. How do you think we'd buy into that? We wouldn't. We'd go to war. No question about it. Countries would. Countries, there's two terms. One of them is your physical boundary. The other one is your strategic boundary, right? The countries have a strategic boundary. And if you're a superpower, you need a cushion. If you're a superpower, you can't have another superpower setting up on your border pointing missiles at you. Not supposed to allow that. And the U.S. the U.S. wouldn't allow it, and neither is Russia and China. And so for some reason, we got all of these idiots who have actually parted from the mainstream media, who don't agree, but on every other thing, they don't believe the government, but this one on China's got them. This one on China has got them. Now, let me say this. I had a couple other notes. What the other thing, the other outcome that has been reaped from the U.S. anti-China move and anti-Russia and a desperate attempt to hold on to a hegemony, which they might have never even had, a domination of the world, is it has created a Russia-China alliance, which I think is a good thing, personally. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think they should have an alliance. And that could be the only thing that saves humanity for this reason. This country is run by idiots, lunatics, and fascists. I'm telling you right now, our country currently is run by a bunch of fascists. We'll see what happens after January 20th, but we'll see. The deep state fascist, deep state Nazi fascist bastards, right? It's not fascist, in my opinion. The America's a fascist Zionist empire. It's definitely a Zionist empire. So how you want to define the word fascist is up to you. Militaristic, authoritarian, militarily aggressive, committed to war. Those are the things to me that committed to the oppression of the rights of its own people. That's all fascism. The FBI, in my opinion, the FBI is the internal intelligence agency that, when an authoritarian government feels challenged, they have to have a way to fight back internally. That's all the FBI is, masquerading as a law enforcement agency. So we've got all that crap here. But bottom line, what we've done is we've created a dynamic where Russia and China have to huddle together to survive. One of the things that happened, part of the Ukraine project, was to set Russia up so that massive economic sanctions could be levied against it, right? And the Russian-China alliance was built as a backstop, really, first and foremost, an economic backstop, because luckily for Russia and China both, China needs everything Russia can produce, for the most part. Wheat, food. Russia's huge, produces a lot of food. So food, natural resources of all kinds, energy, various types of energy. So what's going on? China needs what Russia has. Russia can sell what it has to China. Everybody's happy. And China can act as an economic backstop against the U.S. sanctions. And so as they, there's another thing too that really benefits China. China does have a concern that the U.S. at some time could try to use its naval power to blockade it from natural resources, wherein Russia is close and they share a border and they can share a lot of natural resources along their own border through pipelines and stuff like that they'll have to protect. But whatever the case may be, it works for both of them very, very well. So they created it was an economically defensive alliance, and also diplomatically, both have really outstanding diplomatic corps. At the time it was Sergei Lavrov and Wang Yi, and some more names have been added, but just highly respected diplomatic corps around the world. So their alliance was, I think, mostly diplomatic, and it was economic, which for the benefit of both. I do believe now, and I'll say that's why I think their alliance can save humanity, that it is increasingly moving towards a defensive military alliance, and that they want to set up a dynamic where it's so clear and obvious that those two countries are standing back to back militarily that the U.S. will be deterred from attacking China, because they know that right now the neocons have their alternate plan is, if we can't take Russia out and then go after China, we'll weaken Russia so that it can help China, or weaken Russia and completely do a regime change, take it over, and then we don't have to go after China. We'll just cut off everything. Say, okay, Russia's decided that it's not going to sell you gas or oil or nickel or titanium or food or whatever, and you can do what, if you don't do what we want, so do what we want. They can blackmail them, starve them, do all the terrible things, lay siege to China, economic siege to China. That's what they'd like to get Russia, take over Russia, but it ain't working. So I think Russia and China and you and me both know that the next plan is, okay, well, that didn't work. So some neocons are still going to try to hold on to the Ukraine project to the last end, but their backup plan is, okay, then if we can't have Russia, we can't have it. Let's just go drop everything everywhere, end everything, and then we'll go after China. Well, the truth of the matter is, I think Russia and China, here's what I think. Russia and China would like to get the Ukraine conflict over so they could build their alliance stronger. And it was just a very powerful economic alliance. They can continue to build their economic alliance and continue to buy time. But I do think they will continue to build up their military alliance. And I read something a while back, and Scott Ritter at the beginning of this said, look, Russia has industrial capacity, but they need a lot more. China has unthinkable industrial capacity, but what China doesn't have, let me say this, everybody looks at it like China is Russia's big brother. Well, when it comes to military and technology, Russia now is everybody's big brother. Look at their technology in space. When it comes to technology, they got the legacy of the Soviet Union scientists and technologists and technological, an industrial foundation. So they got a long jump on China. And if you look at their military technology, they're Russia's leading the world. So it gets to this that Scott Ritter was getting at. If you combine Russia's industrial capacity, Russia and China's industrial capacity, but specifically Russia's military technology with China's industrial capacity, man, you have an unbeatable duo. If they say, you know what, China's going to start making Kinjal missiles, China's going to start making Oreshnik missiles, they're going to make this or that. Nobody's got Kinjal or Avant-Garde or any of these other unstoppable hypersonic missiles. Oh, China's going to start making S-400s, S-500s, the latest S whatever, right? Books, you name it all. If China starts utilizing their industrial capacity to spit out Russian technology, the U.S. might as well pack it up and go home. They wouldn't last an hour in a war. I don't think we'd last that long as it is now. For God's sake, we're getting our ass kicked by the Houthis. So, come on. Yeah, we're going to take on Russia and China. But first, we got to fight off these pesky Houthis. Can't very well. They're shooting our planes down, hitting our aircraft carriers with drones and missiles, and we want to take on China. Oh, boy. Yeah, that'll work real well. But my point, I remember I was watching a video reading about one missile factory in China, right? That I forgot what they said. The U.S. has like 8 to 12,000 missiles at that time. And they said they can produce that in about 8 to 12 days because this one missile factory makes 1,000 missiles a day. The U.S. can build about 4 Navy ships a year. China builds about 200. Now, start doing that with S-400s. Su-35s with Kinjals and Oreshnik and all on and on and on. And that Russian technology, the drones, etc. Not saying we don't have any good technology, but missile technology, we are generations behind Russia now in missile technology. Truthfully, Iran, the Houthis have hypersonic missiles. We're fighting the Houthis. Think about this now. Notwithstanding, they might have gotten it from an ally. I'm just saying they got them. We're fighting the Houthis. Israel versus the Houthis, and the Houthis have hypersonic missiles, and the U.S. and Israel doesn't. I tell you where we are, perhaps.
How crazy is that?
So what we're looking at is a circumstance where we have, by our military and diplomatic and full spectrum aggression, have driven tightly together the country with generations ahead of us in military technology. In particular, missile technology and air defense. We've united them in an alliance that, as they say, it's something that's stronger than an alliance. You've united them, and I agree, with a country that has exponentially greater industrial power than we do. That was the move. At this point, they'll be together, and I don't see how we fight them. I also think this. if you remember, one of the things that's been said over the last several years is the U.S. has got to go to war. Look, I think the Biden administration, again, it was 2025, right? We got to go to war by 2025 or 2027. If not, China will be too powerful. Well, first of all, we got to go to China's border to fight them. They're too powerful now. They can put 1,000 missiles probably a day on every base we got in the region. I mean, they'll just unleash literally every base we have in the region. They can probably put 1,000 missiles a day on it for days and days, for months. Who knows how many they have? Probably literally millions of missiles, millions. So, you're done. You don't survive that. But they're like, we've got to fight them by 2027. Why do we want to fight? That just goes to show they don't want to fight us, but we're like, we got to fight them. Why? Because they'll be too powerful. Well, I may be wrong. I don't think Trump wants a war, particularly with China or Russia. He doesn't want nuclear war. So what that means is if Trump lives, which I ain't convinced he lives till January 20th, but if he lives and he's able to, I don't think, like I said, he'll go after the small countries. I don't think Trump wants war with China or Russia. I think that by 2028, the alliance of Russia and China will be so powerful that it'll be farcical to think about the United States, of which will be much weaker by 2028. We're getting weaker and weaker and weaker. It'll be farcical to think about the U.S. going to war with China or Russia by 2028, because we'll have bigger fish to fry at this time internally, as this thing continues to come unravel. And I think their alliance just gets stronger. They've now said they're going to add 9 more countries to BRICS. So their alliance is going to get stronger. Their armaments are going to get more plentiful and more powerful. We've seen the Oreshnikov missile, and now we understand that Russia has some other things coming that's pretty powerful. So they're lapping us. Oreshnikov shows they're getting ahead of us. They got a missile now that, basically they got the power of a nuclear missile without having to use a nuclear weapon. This Oreshnikov thing, it goes up, it fires 6 different warheads. Every warhead has 6 hypersonic missiles in it. So one missile has 36 hypersonic missiles, and that can do some damage. They come in, and like the missiles are coming in at, I don't know, like 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 miles an hour. They're like 3,000 or 4,000 degrees because of the heat and the plasma they create because of their speed. So even when it doesn't even have anything to blow up, it's just devastating kinetic force. Incredible to screw around with that. No. And when they start serial production, what happens if China starts serial production of them? These things are bound to happen. And as they happen, it'll be more obvious that we've lost. As Andrei Martyanov says, America lost the arms race. We've lost the whole thing. And hopefully, what the hell's going to happen? Who could predict that we can at least start to focus internally a little bit more. We're gonna have to, because we're going to be facing hyperinflation at some point as alternative economic infrastructures grow. Because the Russia-China alliance is started as an economic alliance, and it will be the backbone. It will be the foundation of the new world economic alliances that will be basically. It won't be something that's made against the U.S. It'll be another option. And in fact, they'll probably say to the U.S., if you want to trade with us, you can use our mechanisms, our alternatives to the SWIFTs. You can use our stuff. You can trade with us if you want to, but we don't need to trade with you, on your traditional economic platforms, because they were used in an aggressive manner. So I think the new economic platform will be available for anyone who wants to trade on it. That's what I think. But ours is just going to wither on the vine. So at any rate, thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great
Western sanctions on Russian energy are already falling apart. Before Trump could act, India's Modi has already made his move. It seems like New Delhi has taken it upon itself to thwart the European and the US sanctions. Just have a look at this. Russia and India are now signing the largest ever crude oil deal yet, which will see India's Reliance Industries import nearly 500,000 barrels per day from Russia's state oil firm Rosneft. It's a 10-year agreement. The deal is worth at $130 billion at today's price for the next 10 years. This is indeed very huge. The deal will make sure that Russian economy and especially its energy sector remains hot irrespective of the EU's pivot away from the Moscow. The deal essentially makes the Russian economy sanctions proof from the coming decade. For the unaware, over one-third of India's energy imports come from the Russian oil. After the EU stopped buying the Russian oil owing to the sanctions following the invasion of Ukraine, India became Russia's biggest oil purchaser. India also doesn't have any sort of sanctions on Russian oil, so its refineries are taking full advantage of the cheaper supply. The sanctions have reduced the price of the Russian oil too, making it cheaper by $3 to $4 per barrel compared to other type of the oil. Russia's oil deliveries to India have doubled last year to $45 billion. The exports of mineral fuel to New Delhi have also jumped by 7% between the January and September this year. The bilateral trade between India and Russia have also grown significantly over the past 2 years, currently standing at $66 billion. Moscow and New Delhi have also set a target of reaching nearly $100 billion in bilateral trade by 2030. India is doubling down on oil trade with Russia after Trump's victory in the United States. Trump is a pragmatic politician and knows that Russia must not be abandoned to keep China from usurping it virtually. Trump had previously also stated that he doesn't like the sanctions when it came to Russia. Trump's approach to foreign policy often revolves around forming personal ties with key leaders. As per the retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, who has been tapped for the role of US envoy for Ukraine crisis, Trump sees sanctions and brute force as last resort, not the first options. This means that when it comes to issue like the Ukraine war, Trump is likely to try taking the things in a talking manner with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin instead of imposing more sanctions. First thing first, US and EU sanctions on Russia have failed miserably. Still, they kept on piling thousands of sanctions on Moscow just for the headline management. Trump's view on sanctions is different. He has previously mentioned that he doesn't love sanctions because they push country away from the United States. If Trump decides to reduce or remove these sanctions, Russia is likely to regain access to the international market that has been restricted. Meanwhile, India and China will anyway keep importing the Russian energy irrespective of the US policy, given their clout in the international markets. Some experts also believe that Trump's personal connection with Vladimir Putin and his views on sanctions made it likely that he will ease the US restrictions on Russia. But Trump is still 50 days away from assuming the charge as the 47th president of the United States. Before he could make any move, India's Modi has made it already clear Russia is too big to be ignored. In fact, there are also reports that Delhi might soon host Putin in the beginning of the new year, a sight that is sure to trigger anxiety in Brussels, Kyiv, and also in the deep state in the United States.
President-elect Trump has issued a strong warning to the BRICS nations, demanding that they offer guarantees to prevent any alternate currency from emerging as a competitor to the US dollar. Trump reaffirmed his commitment to ensuring the dollar stays the preeminent global reserve currency and cautioned that severe economic penalties, including 100% tariffs, would be imposed on countries seeking to challenge its dominance. For decades, the US dollar has held a leading position in global commerce, serving as the world's principal reserve currency. This status has conferred substantial economic advantages upon the United States, notably the ability to borrow at lower costs and effectively deploy financial sanctions. However, in recent years, there has been a growing push by various countries, particularly those within the BRICS alliance, to develop alternative mechanisms for transactions and reduce their reliance on the dollar. Russia, for instance, has fervently endorsed a BRICS payment system designed to facilitate trade in local currencies and circumvent the dollar-focused financial framework. Trump's stern statement appears to reflect the United States' awareness of the accelerating momentum behind de-dollarization efforts. It underscores concerns that a large-scale departure from the dollar could undermine its global standing and thereby destabilize the U.S. economy. If major economies successfully pivot to other currencies or create a credible challenger to the dollar, the U.S. could face outcomes such as reduced treasury demand, higher borrowing costs, and diminished geopolitical influence. A quickening move away from the dollar would indicate a significant alteration to the international monetary structure, undercutting America's capacity to exert economic power. The implications of such a shift would be enormous for global trade, finance, and diplomacy, making it a pivotal subject for economists and policymakers to monitor. Let's begin by assessing the current scope of de-dollarization. BRICS members have been steadily increasing the use of their own currencies for trade to reduce their reliance on the US dollar. This move toward greater financial self-sufficiency stems from both political and economic motivations. In early 2023, China and Brazil, the BRICS bloc's two largest economies, agreed to carry out their trade exchanges in their respective currencies, the Chinese yuan, CNY, and the Brazilian real, BRL. This step removes the need for the US dollar as a mediator, enhancing trade efficiency and mitigating exchange rate volatility for businesses in both nations. Data shows that China-Brazil trade was around $150 billion in 2022, with China ranking as Brazil's top trade partner. Shifting to local currencies is expected to streamline transactions by lowering conversion costs and boosting financial autonomy. Iran and Russia have made notable strides in merging their financial systems to promote bilateral trade and bypass Western sanctions. This partnership comprises linking their national payment networks and jointly accepting bank cards, thereby fostering deeper economic ties between the two countries. Early in 2023, Iran and Russia connected their banking systems, permitting Iranian banks to access Russian financial institutions and more than 100 banks across 13 additional nations via Russia's System for Transfer of Financial Messages, SPFS, a substitute for SWIFT. This integration allows for issuing letters of credit, transfers, and guarantees without relying on SWIFT, thereby mitigating the effects of Western sanctions. On July 6, 2024, Iran's central bank announced the linking of its Shahtab interbank network with Russia's Mir payment infrastructure. This step enables Mir cards to be used in Iran, simplifying transactions for Russian tourists and businesses operating in the country. The initiative aims to decrease reliance on Western financial pathways and boost bilateral trade. By November 2024, Iran and Russia further advanced this financial fusion by allowing Iranian bank cards to be utilized in Russia, making it easier for Iranian nationals to process payments and withdraw cash abroad, and tightening commercial bonds between the two economies. India and Russia have also embraced local currencies for business dealings, particularly in the energy market. After the imposition of Western sanctions on Russia in 2022, both countries stepped up the use of the Indian rupee and Russian ruble for transactions. Russia became India's main supplier of crude oil in 2023, with a notable share of those purchases made in Indian rupees. This arrangement enabled the nations to bypass dollar-based payment mechanisms, shielding them from external economic pressures. South Africa, the smallest member of BRICS in economic size, has likewise shown an inclination to settle more of its trades in yuan. China remains South Africa's primary trading partner, with annual bilateral trade surpassing $50 billion. In 2023, South Africa entered pacts to pay for certain imports, especially machinery and electronics, in yuan, effectively curtailing dollar usage and boosting yuan liquidity in African marketplaces. BRICS Pay is a decentralized payment infrastructure developed by the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to facilitate seamless cross-border transactions using their local currencies. The initiative aims to reduce dependence on Western-dominated financial systems such as SWIFT, thereby enhancing the economic sovereignty of member countries. The BRICS Pay project was launched in 2018 by the BRICS Business Council. It leverages existing national payment systems, including Russia's MIR network and India's Unified Payment Interface, or UPI, to enable efficient cross-border payments among member states. The system allows users to make and receive payments in their native currencies, streamlining currency conversions and reducing transaction costs. BRICS Pay is built on advanced blockchain technology to deliver secure, transparent, and efficient financial transactions across member nations. Its architecture blends centralized structures for domestic operations with a decentralized framework for international transactions, ensuring both regulatory compliance and technological flexibility. National payment infrastructures such as Russia's MIR, India's UPI, and China's UnionPay are seamlessly integrated for secure local transactions. At the international level, the system utilizes blockchain's decentralized networks to facilitate direct, peer-to-peer transactions, eliminating intermediaries and enabling efficient real-time settlements. Distributed ledger technology, or DLT, provides immutable transaction records and supports smart contracts to automate currency conversions and compliance processes. The hybrid architecture of BRICS Pay enables rapid deployment, making it adaptable to diverse technical and regulatory environments within the member countries. Its scalability allows for handling increasing transaction volumes and incorporating new participants without compromising efficiency. Interoperability is a cornerstone of the system, facilitating seamless communication between distinct national payment frameworks and ensuring smooth cross-border payments. Additionally, the distributed network optimizes liquidity flows, providing real-time settlements in local currencies. These features enhance the system's efficiency and establish it as a viable alternative to traditional financial platforms. Strategic objectives: reducing reliance on the US dollar. By promoting the use of local currencies in international trade, BRICS Pay seeks to diminish the dominance of the US dollar in global transactions, fostering a multipolar financial world order. Enhancing financial sovereignty. The system provides member countries with greater control over their financial transactions, mitigating the impact of external economic pressures and sanctions. Improving transaction efficiency. By integrating national payment systems, BRICS Pay aims to expedite cross-border payments, reduce costs, and enhance the overall efficiency of financial transactions among member states. Recent developments. In October 2024, during the 16th BRICS Summit in Kazan, Russia, BRICS Pay was officially introduced as a blockchain-based cross-border payment system. Attendees participated in demonstrations showcasing the system's capabilities, highlighting its potential to serve as an alternative to traditional financial networks. Let's take a quick pause. If you've enjoyed the video so far, could we ask a small favor? Hitting the like button helps us reach a broader audience, and sharing your thoughts or feedback in the comments makes an even bigger impact. Thank you for watching. Now, let's dive back in. Strategic gold accumulation by BRICS nations. BRICS nations share a common objective of reinforcing their financial stability and mitigating risks associated with currency volatility and geopolitical uncertainties. In pursuit of this goal, the bloc has engaged in large-scale accumulation of gold reserves. By the end of the second quarter of 2024, BRICS countries collectively held approximately 6,200 tons of gold, representing 21.4% of global reserves. Russia leads this effort with 2,340 tons, accounting for 8.1% of global holdings, followed closely by China with 2,260 tons, or 7.8% of worldwide reserves. Notably, Brazil has nearly tripled its gold reserves between 2018 and 2024, signaling a determined strategy to strengthen its economic defenses. This accumulation highlights a broader intent within the BRICS alliance to reduce dependence on the US dollar and promote financial sovereignty. Economic and geopolitical implications of gold reserves. The amassing of substantial gold reserves serves multiple strategic purposes for BRICS nations. By diversifying their monetary holdings, member states protect themselves against sanctions and enhance their autonomy in monetary policymaking. Gold provides a hedge against external financial risks, ensuring that BRICS economies are better equipped to navigate global economic fluctuations and crises. This effort is not only about insulating their economies, but also about signaling a shift toward a multi-centric global monetary order. The accumulation of gold complements broader efforts to assert economic independence and foster financial systems that operate outside traditional Western-dominated structures. A unified vision for financial resilience. The combined strategies of expanding gold reserves and implementing initiatives like BRICS Pay reflect the bloc's commitment to establishing a robust and self-sufficient financial ecosystem. Together, these measures aim to create a resilient framework capable of withstanding market instabilities while reducing reliance on conventional financial channels like the US dollar and Western-controlled institutions. By aligning their efforts in gold accumulation and decentralized payment infrastructure, BRICS nations are laying the foundation for a financial order that prioritizes stability, independence, and equitable economic participation in the global arena. Why de-dollarization? De-dollarization, countries actively moving away from the US dollar in global trade and finance, is driven by multiple critical factors. Chief among these is the wish to safeguard economic sovereignty and stability. Since the US dollar's dominance grants the United States extensive sway over the global economy, its monetary policies can unleash volatility in other nations. By distancing themselves from the dollar, countries aim to reclaim policy autonomy and reduce susceptibility to external shocks. Additionally, relying on the dollar leaves nations vulnerable to US sanctions, which can impede access to international financial systems. States like Russia and China pursue other options to sustain economic independence and avert such restrictions. Another key impetus is reserve diversification. Historically, central banks worldwide have held sizable portions of their reserves in US dollars, but there is a rising shift toward diversifying into various currencies and even gold. This method spreads out risks and loosens the grip of the dollar. Political and strategic elements come into play as well. Powers like China and Russia seek to counterbalance US influence by bolstering the use of their own currencies in international transactions, aligned with a broader vision for a multipolar global financial landscape. Moreover, regional economic deals are increasingly being used to settle transactions in local currencies, minimizing the role of the dollar. For instance, China and Brazil's agreement to use their respective legal tenders facilitates trade by cutting conversion costs and hurdles. Finally, de-dollarization echoes shifting global economic realities. As emerging markets expand and solidify their positions in world trade, they naturally favor their own currencies to reflect their growing influence and fortify their financial networks. Collectively, these elements highlight the varied and calculated aims propelling the worldwide push toward de-dollarization. Let's now turn to Trump's warning to BRICS. Trump urges BRICS nations to maintain US dollar hegemony, threatening punitive tariffs. BRICS countries working to undercut the dollar is something we won't stand for, Trump stated on his Truth Social account on Saturday. We insist on a clear commitment that these nations will not create or endorse any rival currency that undermines the US dollar. Otherwise, they will face 100% tariffs and be totally cut off from the vast US market. On the campaign trail, Trump has repeatedly vowed to make it economically impossible for any country to move away from the US dollar. His most recent remarks have heightened hostilities in the lead-up to his inauguration in January. Trump's threats are consistent with his previous use of tariffs to achieve economic goals. Strategic tactics to safeguard the dollar. Trump's inner circle is said to be assessing methods to penalize countries conducting non-dollar bilateral trade. Proposals include imposing limitations on exports, tagging such nations as currency manipulators, and levying additional trade duties. These measures align with Trump's ongoing dedication to preserving the dollar's dominating role. In a March conversation, he declared, letting other nations abandon the dollar would deliver a major setback for the U.S. The de-dollarization debate intensified following the BRICS Group's 2023 summit, where they discussed reducing dependence on the dollar. The idea of alternative currencies gained momentum in 2022, when sanctions led by the U.S. against Russia stoked global resentment over the dollar's monopoly. Trump's campaign has highlighted the importance of challenging these developments, signaling a firm intention to counter any economic alliance that aims to diminish the dollar's influence. Tariff menaces and market repercussions. Trump has already rattled international financial markets with his proclamations of imposing expanded tariffs on major trading partners. Previously, he declared that he would subject Chinese imports to a 10% tariff and impose a 25% levy on goods coming from Mexico and Canada, unless those governments enacted tougher measures against drug trafficking and unauthorized immigration. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently visited Trump to go over trade and border issues amid the threat of tariffs, signifying that attempts at reconciliation may be underway. Yet Trump's posture illustrates his willingness to utilize economic levers to advance both his domestic and foreign agendas. There's no way BRICS nations can supplant the dollar in world trade, Trump emphasized. Any country that tries will be completely cut off from the U.S. economy. As Trump gears up to assume the presidency, his forceful economic policies appear poised to play a central role in his second term, with considerable ramifications for international commerce and diplomatic relations. Conclusion. The BRICS nations' decision to develop a new payment system and explore the possibility of introducing a new currency has sent ripples through the Western financial system. These efforts signal a concerted push to challenge the dominance of the U.S. dollar as the world's primary reserve currency. By creating an alternative financial infrastructure and reducing reliance on dollar-denominated trade and reserves, BRICS is actively reshaping the global economic landscape in favor of a more multipolar order. This strategic shift has particularly unsettled the United States, as the dollar's reserve currency status has long provided the U.S. economy with unparalleled advantages, including lower borrowing costs and significant leverage in international markets. Under the Trump administration, these developments have triggered alarm over the potential erosion of America's economic influence. President Trump has openly expressed concern that the coordinated moves by BRICS threaten the foundation of U.S. financial dominance, putting the American economy at risk of losing its privileged position. In response, Trump has escalated rhetoric aimed at nations in the global South, warning them of the dangers of aligning with the BRICS bloc. His administration has emphasized the potential costs of undermining dollar hegemony, including strained economic relations with the United States. However, for many nations, the appeal of a more equitable and independent financial order outweighs these warnings, marking a pivotal moment in the ongoing reconfiguration of global economic power. The BRICS initiative represents not just a challenge to the dollar, but a broader assertion of sovereignty and a call for a fairer distribution of economic influence in the 21st century. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching this video. We sincerely appreciate you.
Far-fetched to say that an African leader is collaborating with a foreign country to cause chaos in another country? Sadly, the answer is yes. We have seen it play over and over again in several African countries. The history book is filled with scenarios like this. So, when the authorities of Niger accused the government of Nigeria of collaborating with France to cause chaos and destabilization in Niger, it wasn't truly shocking. After all, the president of Nigeria, Bola Tinubu, is a known CIA agent and has been collaborating with France. But the question is Nigeria truly working with France to cause chaos in Niger? Let's find out. The Niger-Benin oil pipeline is set to become the largest oil pipeline in Africa. It spans nearly 2,000 kilometers and connects the Agadam oil fields in eastern Niger to the Beninese port of Seme. Sadly, the Agadam oil fields are a region in Niger that is frequently targeted by terrorists. These armed groups have caused chaos and destabilization in the region. Construction of the oil pipeline began in 2019 and was supposed to be completed in 2022. However, the COVID-19 pandemic and attacks by armed groups have stalled the construction. In June 2024, the FPL, an armed rebel group separate from jihadists, claimed responsibility for a series of attacks targeting a Chinese oil project in the country. According to the FPL, this was a warning to the military government and General Tiani in particular to remove himself from power amongst other demands. The FPL's actions, however, threatened to escalate into a full-scale assault on the oil pipeline project that exports crude to neighboring Benin. The recent attack on the pipeline occurred last week, and according to the reports, the Niger-Benin pipeline was bombed between Lido and Karakara in the Dosso region. It was during a meeting with the Charge d'Affaires at the Nigerian embassy in Niger that the Niger Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bakari Sangare, said there are reports alleging Nigeria's security forces were involved in the attack. According to the minister, there are allegations of collaboration between Nigerian security forces and exiled Nigerian dignitaries accused of subversive activities. He also raised the alleged establishment of Nigerian military camps in Gigani and Gidan Kata, near the Niger border. In a statement read on Niger's national television, the foreign minister of Niger said, "Despite efforts to normalize relations, we regret that Nigeria has not given up on serving as a rear base for the destabilization of Niger with the complicity of some foreign powers and officials of the former regime to whom it offers refuge." So the allegation was not just about the attack on the pipeline, it was also about Nigeria providing asylum for former government officials of Niger who fled the country after the coup. Before we proceed, here is a reminder to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. Now, following these allegations, the authorities in Niger have denied the allegations made by Niger. In a statement issued by the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Kimiebi Ebienfa, the federal government denied any involvement with the Lakurawa terrorist group or allegations that its security forces collaborated in the incident. The statement partly read, "The federal government of Nigeria refutes in very strong terms allegations by the Nigerian authorities that the Lakurawa terrorist group, with the help of foreign security forces, including Nigerian security forces, were responsible for the attack on the Niger-Benin oil pipeline on the 13th of December 2024 in Gaya, Dosso region of Niger Republic." It further adds, "The government of Nigeria condoles with the government of Niger over the unfortunate attack on the oil pipeline, but informs that the perpetrators were neither backed nor assisted by Nigerian authorities. The government of Nigeria is strongly committed to the fight against terrorism and will not condone or support the activities of such groups." The federal government also dismissed claims of French military presence in northern Nigeria, allegedly aimed at destabilizing Niger. The authorities in Nigeria highlighted the long-standing cordial relations between Nigeria and France. The statement reiterated that both nations adhered to principles of mutual respect, dignity, and non-interference in internal affairs. Interestingly, another group has also denied the allegations on behalf of the Nigerian authorities. Speaking at a press briefing, the Coalition for Advancement of Peace and Democracy in West Africa strongly condemned the allegations made by the Nigerian authorities, accusing Nigerian security forces of involvement in the recent attack on the Niger-Benin oil pipeline. This was made known by the Secretary General of the coalition, Rahila Umar, who said that the allegations that Nigerian security forces were involved in the attack are not only grossly misleading but pathetic. According to Umar, Nigeria has been at the forefront of fighting terrorism for over a decade, often in collaboration with Nigerian soldiers. She, therefore, reassured the public in Niger and Nigeria that the perpetrators of the pipeline attack were neither backed nor assisted by Nigerian authorities. She also expressed concern over rumors of French military troops in northern Nigeria, stating categorically that these allegations are unfounded, adding that the Nigerian military has a strong history of not accommodating boots on the ground. So here is the big question. Is it possible that Nigeria is collaborating with France to cause destabilization in Niger? Well, while the authorities in Niger have not provided any evidence to back their allegations, the sad truth is that it is very possible. Think about it. The Nigerian president is a known puppet of the West, and we all know that the West does not want the progress of any African country. First of all, when the coup occurred in Niger, the Nigerian president was the first to condemn the coup and even threatened military intervention with the backing of France. When that didn't happen, President Tinubu, who is currently the chairman of the regional bloc, ECOWAS, slapped stringent sanctions on Niger, which led to the death of hundreds of people. But that's not all. In recent times, President Tinubu has drawn Nigeria closer to France at a time when neighboring countries in the Sahel, like Niger, have distanced themselves from France. Recently, President Tinubu paid a visit to France where he met with President Macron. This was the first official visit made by any Nigerian president in the last 2 decades. This is to tell you that historically, Nigeria has not had any business with France, which is not surprising because France did not colonize Nigeria. So, why is Nigeria getting close to France now? This is a very important question. Now, during Tinubu's visit, he signed 2 major deals, one of which was a $300 million pact to develop critical infrastructure, renewable energy, transportation, agriculture, and healthcare in Nigeria. A joint statement from both nations noted, the 2 countries committed to forge a strategic relationship in project implementation and enhance mutual trade and cross-border services by removing fiscal barriers while protecting labor rights. The second deal was an agreement to increase food security and develop Nigeria's solid minerals sector. Both countries have agreed to develop joint projects to promote and diversify the value chain of critical minerals in the solid minerals sector of both countries. Critical minerals such as copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements are essential to clean energy technologies. The statement read, a key component of the MOU is the promotion of sustainable mining activities by executing projects and programs that reduce the environmental impact of mining on carbon emissions, water consumption, and climate change. It also includes the establishment of joint extractive and processing projects through co-financing by public and private entities to diversify and secure the supply of critical minerals and decarbonize energy projects critical to the value chain. While some may see this as merely a collaboration between 2 countries, the fact is that something else is going on. Historically, when any Western country is involved in the mining sector, which relates to the exploitation of an African country's resources, there is always a problem. You see, Niger accused Nigeria of establishing a base for foreign forces, particularly France. In response, the Nigerian authorities said that there is no such base in the country. But isn't that the same way the former president of Ghana, Akufo-Addo, said that there was no US base in the country while there actually was a base? Besides this, can you recall in August this year when concerns began to mount about the possibility of the US setting up a base in Nigeria? At the time, the US AFRICOM general insisted that the US military had no plans of setting up a base in Nigeria. Yet, he paid a visit to the Nigerian president. The US military is very secretive about its operations, so for all we know, a plan to establish a base in Nigeria has already been signed into motion. Don't forget that a few months ago, it became known to everyone that the president of Nigeria is an active CIA agent. Think about that. In addition to this, Nigeria and France have signed a deal for France to exploit Nigeria's mining sector. If you take a look back at all the Francophone countries where France has signed such deals, you will observe one thing in common: the existence of a French military base. Aside from projecting the military strength of France in Africa, these bases were set up to protect France's interest in the mining sectors. So, it will not be far-fetched to say that maybe not now, but later on, a French military base will be set up in Nigeria. The thought that an African country would collaborate with an external force to cause chaos in another African country is saddening but common. The West does not want the unity of Africa because it is the one thing that can place the African continent on a path of progress. So, historically, even up till the present times, the West has always used one African country against the other. Think about it. When the Europeans first set foot on the continent and the transatlantic slave trade began, records showed that a lot of African kings and traditional rulers were involved in the trade in exchange for mirrors and guns. The colonial period was no different. Of course, by this time, Europe had already taken over the continent, but the fact is they were able to do so because they had help from Africans who helped them enforce their rules and ideologies. What about the post-colonial period? The situation was even worse. African leaders and those in power gladly implemented and enforced the interests of the West in exchange for power and wealth, not regarding the state of the people. And today, the situation is the same. In June 2024, Burkina Faso's Captain Traoré made a similar allegation against its African neighbors, Côte d'Ivoire and Benin, that they are working with France to destabilize Burkina Faso's economy and security. But what does Traoré mean by economic destabilization? According to Traoré, Côte d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso are blocking goods at their ports that are headed for Burkina Faso. This is very serious because Burkina Faso is a landlocked country, meaning it is completely surrounded by land and has no direct access to the sea. Now imagine that essential goods like food and medicine are coming from its neighbors, Côte d'Ivoire and Benin, and these countries are preventing goods from reaching Burkina Faso. The first question is, why? According to Traoré, the blockade, orchestrated by the governments of Benin and Côte d'Ivoire, is part of a grander plan to collapse Burkina Faso's economy. And guess what? The reason is that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have withdrawn from the West African regional bloc ECOWAS. The second question here is, how can countries that preach African unity deliberately orchestrate the economic decline of other countries? How can Africa be united? Do you now understand why we say that Africa may be its own problem? It's not just that. Recall that Captain Traoré harshly criticized the neighboring African countries, Côte d'Ivoire and Benin, for collaborating with France to destabilize Burkina Faso's economy and security. So what does he mean by destabilizing security policies? After Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger severed diplomatic relations with France and expelled French troops from their countries, sources have revealed that France wants to reduce its military presence in West and Central Africa to around 600. This is in line with President Emmanuel Macron's plan to limit French military activity in the region. However, Burkina Faso's President Traoré's recent speech says something different. In a press conference, President Traoré delivered a powerful speech about his plans as head of state for the next 5 years, a new protectionist policy on natural resources, scathing revelations about neighboring Benin and Côte d'Ivoire, and how the two countries are working together with France to destabilize Burkina Faso. In a speech at the sports stadium in Ouagadougou, President Traoré accused imperialist France of trying to plunder and destabilize Burkina Faso and other West African countries. He said France had failed in the fight against terrorism and had instead turned to efforts to destabilize Burkina Faso by withdrawing from the country. Specifically, he said there was evidence of the destabilization of Burkina Faso, orchestrated by France and supported by Benin and Côte d'Ivoire. He said, "We have nothing against the Ivorian people, but we have something against the person who governs Côte d'Ivoire. We say this again and again. In fact, there is an operations center in Abidjan aimed at destabilizing our country." Traoré further expressed concern about the policies of politicians in Benin and Côte d'Ivoire, highlighting in particular the presence of 2 French bases in Benin that target Burkina Faso. "Nobody will come to us and say that there are no French bases in Benin that are aimed at us. We have the evidence," Traoré said. According to Traoré, these 2 French bases are being used to train terrorists in Benin, with the aim of destabilizing Burkina Faso. He added that Burkina Faso has concrete evidence of the presence of French bases, such as laid railway tracks and equipped soldiers. He also said there were audio recordings of French operatives in Benin participating in terrorist operations. "We will present the physical evidence," he said. "If these allegations are true, they have some implications. It could be a plot to turn the Burkina Faso people who support Traoré against him. But what do Côte d'Ivoire and Benin have to say on the matter?" In a press release published on social media, the Benin government spokesman immediately rejected Captain Traoré's accusations, calling them abhorrent disinformation that incites public discontent and threatens the peaceful coexistence of our people. The spokesman stressed that attackers from neighboring Burkina Faso and Niger were also involved in the majority of the failed attacks in Benin. It should be noted, however, that President Traoré is not the only one who has accused the President of the Republic of Benin of having a French base near the border with Niger. Nigerian officials have also accused Benin of having a French military base near the border. However, Benin's President Talon has strongly denied the existence of a military base housing French troops near the border with Niger. President Talon even invited the Nigerian government to visit Benin and prove that there was in fact a French military base there. The Niger government did not accept the offer, and it seemed like it would be just a rebuke until photos of President Talon entertaining former French General François Lecointre started circulating on the internet. Some of you may recognize this name. It was this man who made headlines in April this year when he said he supported the recolonization of Africa. For those who have not heard the news, it is shocking. But he said so in a live interview, and he was not even diplomatic about it. According to him, Europe must take its known destiny into its own hands. But guess what? Apparently Africa and the Mediterranean are the destiny of Europe. He added that Europe will have to come back to the continent in 10 or 20 years and recolonize it. To generate sympathy, he said this is necessary because Africans are not self-governing, and African peoples suffer under corrupt and incompetent leaders. Therefore, the fact that an African leader still associates with such a person says a lot about that African leader and proves our point that Africa is its own problem. How can any African leader who considers himself a true Pan-African sign a pact with a person with such an attitude? What's interesting is that this is not the first time Captain Traoré has accused Côte d'Ivoire of harboring instability factors. As you may recall, relations between Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire have been tense recently. In one of his last interviews with state television station RTB, President Traoré expressed concern about the tensions in relations with neighboring countries, especially Côte d'Ivoire. He accused Côte d'Ivoire of protecting elements critical of the regime and failing to counter the terrorist threat that spreads beyond the Ivorian border. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, in his April 26th broadcast, stressed the need for efforts to achieve better understanding with most neighboring countries, but criticized Côte d'Ivoire, claiming it is the opponent of cooperation. He explained, "We need to return to a better attitude. All the destabilizing factors in Burkina Faso are there, and Ivorian officers are speaking ill of Burkina Faso. There are problems that need to be dealt with honestly, without using deception," he said, adding, "At some point you have to stop hypocrisy and tell the truth. There is a problem with the authorities in this country. African countries need to do better. Instead of working with external forces, African countries ought to work with each other to promote African unity. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comment section below."
So, these terrorists are currently benefiting from material support, financial support, and training support from France, with, of course, the complicity of other Western powers. Because if they simply told France to stop, I am sure France would stop. But since they are complicit and Niger deserves a correction, it is of course necessary to supervise the terrorists so that ultimately Niger falls and it is proven to the world, to Africa, and to Nigeria in particular, that we are not worthy of any self-determination, that we are not worthy of taking responsibility for ourselves, and that we are nothing but incapable. But Allah, may He be praised and exalted, is with the truthful, and God willing, they will fail.
Niger Republic's head of state, General Abdourahmane Chiani, has accused France of providing financial support to Nigerian authorities to establish a military base in Borno State. Chiani believes that this initiative is part of a broader plan by France to destabilize Niger and the entire confederation of the alliance of Sahel states. He has articulated concerns that this move could lead to regional instability, framing it as a deliberate act of interference by France in the affairs of Niger.
The destabilization strategy is simple. It consists, firstly, as I said, of financing, equipping, training, and positioning terrorist movements along the border of the Confederation Not only of Niger, but of the Confederation, because the objective is the dismantling of the Confederation. In this sense, what did the French do with, of course, the accompaniment of the European Union, which remains, despite the evidence, attached to the deadly and crazy policy of the French authorities? The French positioned, already on the 25th, I emphasize, the night of October 25th to 26th, 2023, equipment in the Lake Chad Basin at the time when they withdrew, when they disengaged from Niger, passing of course by land which links us with the sister Republic of Chad. They made contact with the terrorists. They offered them, the terrorists of the Bakura wing with Abu their leader, and the terrorists of the ISWAP wing with Abu Musa al-Barnawi as leader, financing, training, and equipment on the condition that these movements agreed to go to war against the Republic of Niger, on the condition that these movements accept that French troops occupy the Lake Chad Basin, certain islands that we know, but whose name we keep silent for obvious reasons. They made this proposal to the two wings of the former Boko Haram of Yusuf Mohammed, if you remember. When they made the proposal on the night of October 25th to 26th, 2023, the Bakura wing was more conciliatory. The ISWAP wing had openly said that it was not ready to go with the French to attack any Muslim country whatsoever. Their fight is for Islam, according to them. But Islam is not learned in Niger. Some, of course, 6th Khalifa, Islam was introduced in Niger. To tell you the strategy used by France, this is not the first contact. They continued and maintained permanent contact with these terrorist movements. They left to create the Lakourwa movement. This Lakourwa movement has caused a lot of ink to flow, but we have, and as I said, God is with the truthful, we have, through special operations conducted, arrested terrorist leaders who have declared to us everything I have just told you and that I am going to tell you. The French, by approaching them in the Lake Chad bed with Nigerian officials, notably the one I spoke about, Ahmed Abubakar, the former head of the NIA agency, the French offered them to open a base in the Sokoto region. A base they named Gaba, in a wooded environment in the Sokoto region. This was in March 2024, March of this year. They offered them, once this base was open, to make the junction between the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, which operates in Mali, and the terrorist elements of ISWAP, which are in the Lake Chad Basin. I say ISWAP, not Boko Haram, that's it, Bakura. Then there is a terrorist wing called Answer. When we received this information, we thought that Nigeria was. We called Ahmed Abubakar Rauf to inform him of the intention that is emerging in the sense of opening a Lakourwa front in Sokoto.
de l'intention qui se dessine dans le sens de l'ouverture d'un front, la Kourawa, dans le Sokoto, et dont la base sera
whose base will be composed of the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, which operates in northern Mali, of Ansar, which operates on the periphery of Nigeria, and of ISWAP. It is a branch of the Islamic State, but which they call the Dullah of the Islands, which is under the orders, as I said, of a certain Abu Musa al-Barnawi, who is the son of Yusuf Muhammad. His real name is Habib. This is the intention that France has to open another front. We did it because we thought that Nigeria was sincerely engaged in the fight against terrorism.
Parce que nous avions pensé que le Nigeria était sincèrement engagé dans la lutte antiterroriste. Nous avons permis.
We allowed Nigerian agents to make contact with the terrorists we arrested, the Emir terrorist leaders. They all reported the same thing to us.
Les chefs terroristes des émirs, c'est pas un, c'est pas deux, c'est pas trois, qui nous ont tous rapporté la même chose. Nous l'avons.
We called him, his team came, the DGSE made rolling means available to them, took care of them for almost a week so that they could conduct the investigations and discover.
Pendant près d'une semaine. Pour qu'ils mènent les investigations et découvrent. Malheureusement, nous regrettons de l'avoir fait puisque nous
Unfortunately, we regret having done so since we understood that this debriefing led certain emirs to become entrenched because the message that was passed to them was a message of trickery, of deception, of duplicity.
De tromperie, de duplicité. La France ne s'est pas arrêtée à ça.
France did not stop there. France continued then in the Lake Chad basins. What did they do?
Dans les bassins du lac Tchad. Qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait? Après la rencontre du 25 au 26.
After the meeting of October 25th to 26th, they returned on the night of January 10th to 11th to land a large batch of equipment, weapons, and others for the benefit of the Bakura terrorists.
De matériel, armement et autres au profit des terroristes El Bakura. Le 29.
On January 29th later, they will return to an island called Burkina, which is 10 kilometers east of Boso, where the terrorists were gathered for the occasion.
Boso, où les terroristes étaient réunis pour la circonstance.
All the weapons deemed obsolete by the French were replaced. The individual AK-47 weapons, whether they were collective weapons and equipment, notably through the supply of mines, mind you, even anti-personnel mines, while their use is officially prohibited and France is a signatory to the convention of this prohibition.
Même des mines antipersonnelles, alors que l'usage est officiellement interdit et que la France est signataire de cette interdiction.
They equipped them with these weapons. They equipped them with anti-tank weapons, therefore mines. This happened on January 29th, 2024.
Le 29 janvier 2024. Plus tard, ils sont
Later, they returned, and it only escalates.
Ça ne fait que monter en surenchère.
In November, October 1st, on the 16th of this year, they returned with large sums of money.
Ils sont revenus avec d'importantes sommes d'argent. Nous l'avons annoncé dans un éditorial.
We announced it in an editorial. They have always committed their will, and to prove to the Boko Haram movement that they are sincere in their relations and that they have promised the equipment, not only, but the supply of speedboats. They are pirogues, the speedboat pirogues with engines, but not pirogues. It's speedboats designed for travel on the sea or any body of water.
C'est des vedettes conçues pour le déplacement sur la mer ou toute étendue d'eau. Ils ont promis.
They promised 7 speedboats to the Boko Haram movement. On November 7th, they returned with, mind you, for the Bakura wing, 1 billion CFA francs.
Pour l'aile Bakura, 1 milliard de francs CFA. Pour l'aile réticente de ISWAP,
for the reluctant wing, ISWAP, they promised 4 billion CFA francs if they only accept that the French settle permanently in their zone of influence inside Nigeria.
Définitivement dans leur zone d'influence à l'intérieur du Nigeria. Puisque c'est une zone où j'ai servi.
Since it is an area where I served and that I know particularly well, all the islands of the Lake Chad Basin, whether on the Niger side, whether on the Nigeria side, whether on the Chad side. We had maneuvered on foot for months in 1996 and 1997.
1996 et en 1997. Donc c'est une zone que je connais parfaitement.
So, it is an area that I know perfectly. They promised, if they accept that they settle, for billions CFA francs to the state of Nigeria. They promised a sum. I leave the monopoly to President Tinubu to say how much the French offered him to settle in the state of Borno.
Je laisse le monopole au président Tinubu de dire combien les Français lui ont proposé pour s'installer dans l'état du Borno. D'accord. C'est pas fini.
It's not over. The French mobilized the terrorists, and when they arrived in December, on December 7th, this is what happened.
Décembre, le 7 décembre. Voilà ce qui s'est passé. Ils ont décidé, toujours pour vous donner une idée.
They decided, still to give you an idea, to give the people the scale of the great international plot that is being hatched, they asked Boko Haram to form a company of 150 men that they will position in northern Niger.
De constituer une compagnie de 150 hommes qu'ils vont positionner dans le nord du Niger. La France s'occupe
France is taking care of the full payment of the salaries of the 150 fighters deployed by Boko Haram, who will be joined by the movements.
Qui seront rejoints par les mouvements, ça c'est les Français qui ont dit ça. Qui seront rejoints
It is the French who said that, who will be joined by the Risboula movements, then rebel movements that are in northern Chad, and they will form a common front installed inside Niger, in the chains of northern Niger, to wage war on Niger.
À l'intérieur du Niger, dans les chaînes du nord Niger, pour faire la guerre au Niger. Nous avons donc les combattants.
So we have the fighters installed in the chains of northern Niger, we have the fighters installed in the Lake Chad Basin by France, we have the Lakurawa fighters. We know how they were put in place. I told you, installed in the area. You take from Sokoto to KBI, Gaba, Tangaza, has K1, has K2.
Pauni, Sarma, Baraya, Tangaza, Haske 1, Haske 2. Tout ceci sont des positions.
All this are positions. I have not cited everything. There are still a string of positions between Sokoto, Zamfara, and Kebbi, notably Kaiji.
Zamfara et Kebbi, notamment Kaiji.
Which is also a forest where they also have Lakurawa elements, notably the two super camps. I believe that, since we denounced it, the construction site has been stopped, where the French intended, in Gidanata and then Gigani, to build two super camps where they will store equipment that the terrorists who are in the Sarma forest will be particularly responsible for recovering.
Particulièrement de récupérer et acheminer une partie dans le nord Mali.
And transporting part of it to northern Mali. We have inside Benin, it's a belt. Follow the description I am giving.
Dans le nord Bénin, nous avons Porga.
In northern Benin, we have Porga. We have said it, we have repeated it, the special forces currently in Africa are in two countries.
Sont dans deux pays. Un pays West Africain.
A West African country and a second West African country, which is Benin.
Donc, deux pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, ils se reconnaîtront.
Two West African countries, they will recognize themselves, but Benin, already I say it and I repeat it, it recognizes itself. They are in Porga and in the forest, particularly of W.
Pour ceux qui ont l'utilisation des coordonnées, vous utilisez.
For those who use coordinates, you use 11 degrees, 02 minutes, 49.963 seconds north,
0,63 secondes nord. Ensuite, vous utilisez
Then you use 0 degrees, 59 minutes, 35.20 east, and you walk on the azimuth 315 degrees, less than 5 kilometers, you will come across one of the 2 positions that we know of the French Special Forces.
À moins de 5 km, vous allez tomber sur une des 2 positions que nous connaissons des forces spéciales françaises. Que ceux qui doutent,
that those who doubt can put themselves to the exercise and try.
S'ils ne savent pas positionner
If they do not know how to position a point on the map, let them approach the military who will report these coordinates that I have given on the map, and you will see that it is the Porga aerodrome.
L'aérodrome de Porga. Je l'ai dit, la distance même, la longueur de cet aérodrome-là.
Porga, I said, the distance, even the length of this tarmac there, in a previous interview, walk less than 5 kilometers on the azimuth to be brief and that people understand, northwest, you will fall on the second of the positions that we know inside Benin.
Des positions que nous connaissons à l'intérieur du Bénin.
Please support our effort to scout the internet and bring forth uplifting updates about the mother continent every now and then by donating a super thanks of any amount. Thank you.
What if a landlocked country in Africa is about to flip the script on global energy dependency? Burkina Faso, a nation known more for its struggles than its triumphs, is taking a bold leap toward the future. And it doesn't involve begging for foreign aid or relying on the West. No, this is about electric vehicles, solar power, and a vision that could reshape not just Burkina Faso, but the entire African continent. But how are they doing it? Let's find out. All right, let's cut to the chase. Burkina Faso has been stuck in a cycle of importing fuel for years, and it's not just a minor inconvenience, it's a money pit. For a country like Burkina Faso, which is still developing and struggling with economic instability, spending millions on foreign oil every year is unsustainable. When the cost of fuel goes up globally, it hits hard. The people of Burkina Faso end up paying more for basic services and infrastructure development, and the government gets trapped in a vicious cycle of relying on imports. So what does Burkina Faso do? It says no more and turns to electric vehicles, EVs. The electric vehicle solution is a game changer, and here's why. EVs don't depend on imported fuel. They run on electricity, and guess what? Burkina Faso has an abundance of sunshine. Solar power is a renewable resource that could easily power these vehicles. Imagine what happens when you stop relying on expensive fuel imports and start using your natural resources to power vehicles. The country's energy bills drop, and the savings can be reinvested into essential services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. But that's not all. Electric vehicles reduce the country's carbon footprint, helping it join the global fight against climate change. Traditional vehicles with combustion engines spew out pollutants into the air, contributing to the climate crisis and poor air quality in cities. Transitioning to electric cars means cleaner air, fewer respiratory issues for the population, and an overall healthier environment. And what's even better, as Burkina Faso becomes less reliant on fossil fuels, it is taking a giant step toward energy independence, reducing vulnerability to fluctuating fuel prices from abroad. Now we know what you're thinking. This is great, but how do you make that transition work practically? Well, that's where the 53 electric vehicle help comes in. And you'll want to hear how this aid plays a pivotal role in kickstarting Burkina Faso's electric revolution. Stick till the end. The 53 electric vehicles were given by a Chinese billionaire. Sounds like a big deal, right? Well, it is. This is where things get interesting. The help is not just a generous gift, it's a statement. It's a catalyst for a much bigger shift in Burkina Faso's transportation infrastructure. These 53 vehicles aren't just sitting around looking pretty. They are the foundation for the transition to a modern, sustainable system of electric transportation. Think about it. With these 53 vehicles on the road, Burkina Faso gets a real-life test run of how electric vehicles can function in their environment. The vehicles will help build local knowledge and expertise in electric transportation. They'll serve as the proof of concept for the government, businesses, and citizens, showing that EVs can work in Burkina Faso's climate and terrain. They also pave the way for establishing the infrastructure that will be necessary for a wider EV adoption. And here's where it gets interesting. These 53 cars are going to be inspiring the government to plan the future of electric transportation at scale. But it's not just about Burkina Faso, is it? This help is also a sign of the growing relationship between China and African nations. China has been investing heavily in Africa's infrastructure and technology sectors, and this aid is just the tip of the iceberg. While Western countries often come to Africa with aid packages that come with all sorts of strings attached, China's model is about real, tangible partnerships. This isn't charity, it's partnership. China is providing solutions, not just handouts, and Burkina Faso is benefiting from that approach. What does this mean for the future? These 53 vehicles will serve as an example. More vehicles will follow, charging stations will be built, and the country will continue to lead the way for Africa in embracing green technology. But how does this tie into the bigger picture? That's where Ibrahim Traore's leadership comes into play. Traore isn't just a leader, he's a visionary. His plan for Burkina Faso doesn't rely on the old playbook of begging for international aid or relying on foreign powers to solve problems. No, Traore is charting a path towards self-sufficiency and long-term sustainability. He's laser-focused on ensuring that Burkina Faso doesn't just survive, but thrives in an increasingly green, self-sufficient world. Traore sees the electric vehicle shift as more than just a way to modernize transportation. For him, it's a move that ties into his larger goals of reducing Burkina Faso's dependency on outside resources. By embracing electric vehicles, Burkina Faso is not only saving money on foreign oil, it's investing in its future. And the 53 cars given by China, they fit perfectly into Traore's broader vision of a modern, eco-friendly Burkina Faso that isn't just surviving on global handouts, but carving out its path. This isn't about jumping on the green bandwagon because it's the trendy thing to do. It's about building a future where Burkina Faso can stand on its own 2 feet, economically and environmentally. Traore's vision is about independence. By reducing reliance on fossil fuels, the country is freeing itself from the grip of foreign powers and positioning itself as a regional leader in sustainable development. Traore's leadership is all about progress, and the move to electric vehicles is just one piece of the puzzle. But what does this mean for the future of Burkina Faso's economy and people? Well, let's talk about the direct economic impacts next, because they're going to be huge. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The move to electric vehicles is not just about reducing emissions, it's about boosting Burkina Faso's economy. Think about it. The more the country relies on foreign oil, the more money is drained out of the economy. That's millions of dollars that could be spent on infrastructure, healthcare, and schools. When you stop depending on foreign fuel, you stop losing money that could be reinvested into the people. With the shift to electric vehicles, Burkina Faso will save on fuel imports, which can be redirected into other vital sectors. Imagine the possibilities. That money could be invested in public services like healthcare and education, or it could help create more sustainable industries that employ local people. This transition also creates jobs, lots of jobs. There's manufacturing, installation of charging stations, maintenance of vehicles, and more. As the electric vehicle market grows, so will the local green economy. But wait, there's more. Transitioning to electric vehicles also positions Burkina Faso as a potential leader in the green economy across Africa. Other nations will see what's happening in Burkina Faso, and they'll want in. This opens the door to international investments, partnerships, and trade in green technology. As Burkina Faso builds out its electric infrastructure, it will attract the kind of attention that could lead to even more projects in renewable energy and green tech. In short, Burkina Faso is positioning itself as a future-facing economy that's not just preparing for tomorrow, but actively shaping it. The economic benefits of electric vehicles go far beyond just cutting costs. The entire landscape of Burkina Faso's economy is about to transform, and this is just the start. But what about the environmental impact of all this? This is where the real magic happens. The shift to electric vehicles (EVs) in Burkina Faso is a game changer for the planet. Traditional gas-powered vehicles are notorious for emitting harmful gases into the atmosphere. And let's not sugarcoat it. This pollution is killing the planet. In Burkina Faso, where air quality isn't always the best and climate change is already starting to bite, moving to EVs is more than just an option. It's a necessity. Electric vehicles have zero tailpipe emissions, which means they don't pump carbon dioxide or other harmful gases into the air. Boom. Cleaner air, fewer health issues, and a step closer to a future where pollution doesn't choke us. But it doesn't end with just the vehicles themselves. The real beauty of Burkina Faso's green transition is that it's going hand in hand with renewable energy, specifically solar power. With so much sunlight, Burkina Faso is perfectly positioned to tap into solar energy to charge those EVs. Think about it. Burkina Faso is powering electric cars with the sun, cutting down on fossil fuel consumption and massively reducing its carbon footprint.
So what sources of energy are being used in Africa in terms of renewable? Solar, mainly in Northern Africa. And then in Eastern Africa, we have a wonderful, wonderful program for Eastern Africa for geothermal energy. And a country like Kenya is 40% geothermal energy and almost 30 or 40% wind power. So just to tell you how the strides our continent have been taking in terms of availing renewable energy to our people and the investments and the projects either in solar and wind.
This is revolutionary, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa as a whole. If this plan works, it will be a model for other African nations to follow. Why? Because Africa is already blessed with renewable resources. What it needs are the policies and investments that Burkina Faso is embracing right now. This isn't just a feel-good move. It's a real solution to the environmental crisis we're all facing.
The share of renewable energy in Africa's energy mix is 40%. That's the highest in the world. That's higher than Europe, definitely higher than the US, Japan, UK, you name it. So it's higher than the global average. When we go even deeper, because Africa is 54 countries, we have 22 countries that depend mainly on renewable energy. More even than that, we have 5 African countries that who depend on renewable energy at rates like 95%. Did you hear these statistics? I don't think so.
But does Burkina Faso have the infrastructure to make this work? Can they pull it off? Here's where China comes in. China's involvement in Africa has often been misunderstood or mischaracterized as just another country trying to control Africa. But that narrative is changing, and Burkina Faso is at the center of that change. The reason China is involved in the electric vehicle push in Burkina Faso isn't just to flex its geopolitical muscle. It's about real solutions. Unlike Western aid, which often comes with strings attached or political conditions, China's approach has been to invest in practical, useful solutions. The aid of 53 electric vehicles is a clear sign of this. China is helping Burkina Faso and other African nations by providing them with the tools they need to build sustainable, self-reliant economies. Instead of dumping cash into a system that keeps Africa dependent, China is offering resources and technology to solve the continent's problems. These 53 cars aren't a handout. They're an investment in Burkina Faso's green future. China's involvement isn't just about Africa's immediate needs. It's about preparing for the long haul. This isn't just a one-off donation. It's part of a larger strategy of mutual benefit. China is fostering relationships that go beyond the transactional. In return, China gains a new ally in Africa's green economy, opening up opportunities for future trade, investment, and collaboration. And China is also willing to help Burkina Faso with the right infrastructure. So, let's step back for a moment and ask, how is this all connected? How does Burkina Faso fit into the larger global trends of sustainable development? Burkina Faso's electric vehicle move is no isolated incident. This shift is happening everywhere, and it's a part of a larger global trend. As the world grapples with climate change, countries around the globe are investing in clean energy, sustainable infrastructure, and electric transportation. Whether it's European Union policies or the booming EV markets in China, the global push is clear. The future is green. What makes Burkina Faso's move so interesting is that it's jumping on the bandwagon at just the right moment. The market for electric vehicles is booming, technology is advancing, and the economic feasibility of making the switch has never been better. Burkina Faso isn't waiting around for foreign aid or handouts. It's seeing the global trend and making sure it doesn't miss out. It's positioning itself as a green energy hub in Africa, which, in the coming decades, could put it at the forefront of the continent's future. But what challenges will Burkina Faso face in using electric vehicles? All right, time to face reality. No transition, no matter how noble, comes without its challenges. While the shift to electric vehicles EVs in Burkina Faso is exciting, it isn't exactly going to be smooth sailing from day one. There's work to do, and plenty of it. First is the upfront cost. While the long-term savings on fuel are clear, electric vehicles are generally more expensive upfront than their gas-guzzling counterparts. That means the government, businesses, and individuals in Burkina Faso will need to make the initial investment. However, there's hope here too. With international partnerships, especially from China, which is already contributing to the cause, Burkina Faso could secure subsidies or incentives that help make EVs more affordable. As demand grows, economies of scale will kick in, and the price of EVs will come down. But here's the thing. Burkina Faso isn't going to let these challenges slow it down. The country is already taking proactive steps to build this green infrastructure, with a focus on renewable energy to power the vehicles. There's a roadmap in place, and as Burkina Faso advances through these hurdles, it will serve as a blueprint for other African nations. It's not going to be easy, but if anyone's up for the task, it's Burkina Faso. Now that we've gotten the challenges out of the way, let's dive into the real fun part: opportunities. And Burkina Faso's electric vehicle revolution is about to unlock some seriously exciting ones. First, think about the job market. We're talking about a whole new industry springing up around electric vehicles, from scratch. With the country investing in renewable energy, the construction of charging stations, and the manufacturing of EVs, there's going to be a surge in demand for skilled workers. Green-collar jobs are going to be the new norm. From electricians to engineers, mechanics to tech experts, there will be a massive push to create a workforce trained specifically for this new green economy. It's not just about creating more jobs, it's about creating high-value jobs that lead to long-term, sustainable employment. And it's not just job creation. This is a massive economic opportunity. As Burkina Faso builds out its electric vehicle infrastructure, it will attract investments not only from within the country, but also from international companies looking to capitalize on the booming green tech market. Imagine a situation where Burkina Faso becomes the go-to destination for companies looking to launch EV production in Africa or develop solar-powered EV charging stations. These investments could transform the country's economy, setting it up for years of growth. Let's not forget about the ripple effect. As Burkina Faso adopts electric vehicles, it will be creating demand for a wide range of complementary sectors: green energy solutions, battery production, recycling, and even educational programs focused on sustainability and green technologies. This transition will create a whole new ecosystem of industries. And guess what? It's homegrown. So, what does this mean for the rest of Africa?
Thank you, David. Allow me at the outset to thank you for inviting me to these talks and to thank the audience for being patient with us and to attending this one-to-one. Well, the message you just mentioned was not by some African leaders, it was by all African leaders. The position of Africa, and let me maybe explain this and dispel some of the misperceptions. You all know that we have been preached to prescribed solutions, given instructions sometimes throughout our history. And And the stories that you read in the media or that you read that are, used everywhere, unfortunately, they're not always balanced. There are lots of problems in Africa, including problems of governance. I'm not saying otherwise, but we cannot be all that bad. It cannot be that every and each single story about Africa.
Burkina Faso's lead is showing the way. Other African nations will be looking at Burkina Faso's success with green transportation and renewable energy and asking themselves, why aren't we doing that too? As the global demand for sustainable practices rises, Africa can either be a passive player or an active participant. Burkina Faso has already chosen the latter. Now, let's zoom out and look at what Burkina Faso's electric vehicle revolution means for the entire continent of Africa. Because make no mistake, this isn't just a national win, it's a continental game changer. Burkina Faso is doing something that Africa has needed for years: leading. For decades, the continent has been seen as the place where others, Western powers, foreign aid organizations, and global corporations step in and take the reins. But that narrative is changing. Burkina Faso is proving that African nations can not only catch up with the rest of the world, but take the lead in key areas like green technology, sustainability, and energy independence. Think about it. With solar power being abundant across much of the continent, Africa is uniquely positioned to leapfrog the fossil fuel dependency that's plagued much of the Western world. Countries like Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria could follow Burkina Faso's lead, building green tech industries that not only reduce dependence on foreign oil, but also attract international investments in renewable energy and sustainable infrastructure. But it's not just about economics. It's about reshaping the African narrative. Instead of relying on others to provide solutions, Africa is showing that it can be at the forefront of global green innovations. Burkina Faso is setting the example, and the rest of the continent is watching. The future is bright, and Africa's green revolution is just getting started. How many other countries do you think will join Burkina Faso on this path? Will Africa finally transform without the West? Let us know in the comments section. Do you see the change happening soon?
BRICS continues to grow in influence and is becoming one of the most important organizations on Earth. BRICS is a Global South-led forum that was founded in 2009 by Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and then in 2010, South Africa joined. Since then, BRICS has continued to grow. In 2024, 4 new countries were officially admitted as full members, which include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. And then at a historic summit in the Russian city of Kazan in October 2024, 13 more countries were officially invited to become partner countries of BRICS. In December, Russia confirmed that 9 of those 13 countries have accepted the invitation, and on the 1st of January 2025, the following 9 countries will now become partner countries of BRICS: Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Thailand, Uganda, and Uzbekistan. And then the other 4 countries that were invited but have not yet accepted the invitation include Algeria, Nigeria, Turkey, and Vietnam. And Russia made it clear that those 4 countries could potentially join as well. They did not reject the invitation, but as of the end of 2024, they had not given an official response. So I made a map that shows the composition of BRICS as of the 1st of January, 2025. And now there are 9 full members of BRICS. There are 9 partner countries. There are 4 countries that have been invited to be partners but have not yet officially given an answer. There is 1 country that was invited to be a full member that has not given an answer, that's Saudi Arabia. And there was 1 country that was invited to be a full member but rejected the offer, which is Argentina. When it was originally invited to join, Argentina's center-left government of President Alberto Fernandez said that he was going to join. But then before officially Argentina was accepted, the very right-wing pro-US leader Javier Milei came to power, and he rejected the offer before Argentina officially joined in January of 2024. So what's noteworthy, as you can see on the map, is that BRICS is very powerful in Asia, and it's growing as well in Africa. There are 4 countries that are now part of BRICS officially, and there are 2 more that may be part of BRICS in the near future, Algeria and Nigeria. And Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa. Algeria has the largest landmass in Africa. Over in Latin America, there are now 3 countries in BRICS, including the largest and most populous country in the region, Brazil, with the biggest economy, also including Bolivia and Cuba. Of course, Cuba is a country that has been suffocated for over 60 years by an illegal U.S. blockade. The U.S. has tried to destroy the Cuban economy ever since the revolution in 1959. But Cuba has always been very important in global South movements fighting against colonialism and imperialism. Cuba was part of the non-aligned movement during the first Cold War. And today, Cuba has still played a very important role in encouraging unity across the global South. This means that BRICS now has 18 members and partners, and together they represent more than 41% of the global economy when GDP is measured at purchasing power parity, and they represent roughly half of the entire world population. As I'll show later in this analysis today, BRICS also represents more than 1/3 of global oil production, and BRICS countries are very important in global commodity markets, making up some of the largest producers of crucial minerals like nickel and copper and iron ore. And BRICS countries produce huge amounts of food, especially cereals and meat, which are needed to feed the world population. So it's not just that they represent more than 2/5 of the global economy and roughly half the world population. They also are commodity powerhouses, agriculture powerhouses, and energy powerhouses. So BRICS cannot be ignored. The global South is coming together, trying to form some kind of organization for economic cooperation as the global South grows in economic influence. So what does BRICS partner status mean? It means that a country is now part of BRICS and is on the path to becoming a full member in the near future. This is similar to the process that is used by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and many members of BRICS are already members of the SCO. The SCO is more of a security-oriented organization, whereas BRICS is more focused on economic cooperation and especially de-dollarization, creating alternatives to the US-dominated global financial system, which is based on the US dollar. At the 2024 summit in Russia, BRICS officially endorsed a comprehensive plan to transform the international monetary and financial system. I published a video and an article summarizing that report, explaining BRICS's proposal. I will link to that in the description below. But the point is that BRICS is creating alternative financial mechanisms to de-dollarize, so countries that are part of BRICS can trade together using their local currency, so they don't need the dollar. And they're also trying to create new platforms for investments in other currencies to create reserve assets, so central banks in BRICS countries can hold other assets, not just US dollars and US Treasury securities. They're also trying to create an alternative to the SWIFT interbank messaging system, which the US has weaponized in order to impose sanctions on countries, cutting out banks in countries like Russia. So BRICS is going to create alternative mechanisms so countries can process payments between banks. And BRICS is also talking about creating platforms to settle trade imbalances in gold and commodities, including wheat and oil, by creating exchanges that are located in BRICS countries, not the West. So if you want to get more information about that, I have it linked to in the description below. But now I want to go through some of the statistics showing how BRICS is becoming more and more influential in the world. So now that BRICS has 9 full members and 9 partner countries, together it represents roughly half of the global population. There are a little over 8 billion people in the world, and BRICS now has 4 billion people among its members and partners. So if you look at a list of the 20 most populous countries on Earth, 9 of those 20 are now part of BRICS. Of course, India and China are founding members of BRICS. India is the most populous. China is the second most populous. Together, they have more than 2.8 billion people. Indonesia, which is now a BRICS partner, is the 4th most populous country after the United States. So when you combine India, China, and Indonesia, they together represent more than 3 billion people. And then add in Brazil, which is the 7th most populous country. Then Russia is the 9th most populous country. And Ethiopia is the 10th most populous country. So 6 of the 10 most populous countries are now part of BRICS. And then you also have other very big countries like Egypt, Iran, and Thailand, which are also in the top 20 and are now part of BRICS. What about the global economy? Well, the original 5 BRICS members together represent more than 30% of world GDP measured at purchasing power parity, which accounts for what you can actually buy with the currency. So not just looking at market exchange rates, which especially at a time right now when the US dollar is very overvalued, it makes the US economy look bigger than it actually is. And it makes other countries where their currencies have fallen against the dollar look smaller than they actually are. So when you measure at purchasing power parity, you can see that the BRICS 5, the original members, now have a larger share of the world economy than the G7, which is the group of 7 colonialist countries that colonized most of the world. That is North America, Europe, and Japan. If you look at the 9 countries that are now full members of BRICS together, their GDP represents more than 36% of the entire world. China is the world's biggest economy at 19% of global GDP. India is 8% of world GDP. And other very big economies in BRICS include Russia at over 3.5%, Brazil at over 2.4%. Then we can add in the new 9 BRICS partner countries. And although their economies are smaller, Indonesia is still a major economy in the world. Indonesia represents roughly 2.4% of global GDP. And when you add together the BRICS 9 members plus the BRICS 9 partner countries, together they represent just over 41% of global GDP. However, with all of that said, I should point out that GDP is not the best measurement. What is GDP? Gross domestic product. It's a measurement of the value of all of the goods and services produced in a country in 1 year. However, if you look at a country like the United States, its economy looks like it's very strong, very powerful. But when you break down the composition of GDP, you can see that in reality, manufacturing, the actual production of tangible products that people need for our lives, is just over 10% of US GDP. However, 21% of US GDP comes from the FIRE sector, that is finance, insurance, and real estate. So when banks and realtors and brokers charge more fees, GDP goes up. Or 13% of US GDP consists of professional and business services, including things like white-collar workers such as lawyers and managers. So when US attorneys charge more fees, US GDP goes up. Another example is healthcare. Healthcare represents 18% of US GDP. However, the US health system is notoriously bad. It has some of the worst public health results in the industrialized world, and yet the US spends roughly twice as much on healthcare as a percentage of GDP compared to the other advanced economies in the OECD. Moreover, 8% of US GDP consists of something called imputed rents to owner-occupied housing. What does that mean? It means this is how much an owner of a house in the US would hypothetically pay to rent the house that they own and live in. So in other words, 8% of US GDP is imaginary. It doesn't exist. This is an example of how GDP can be sometimes useful, but it can also obscure. And at the end of the day, it doesn't actually show how productive your economy is if it can actually manufacture things that make people's lives better. And when you break down the sectors that make up GDP, you can see that a huge part of US GDP is overhead. It's corporate bureaucracy. It's fees and red tape and insurance. And you cannot eat that part of GDP. So a more useful measurement can be food production. Let's look at the share of BRICS countries in global food production. I'm looking here at data from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and it shows the main primary crops produced in the world, which together represent over half of all global agricultural production. In order of size, these are sugarcane, maize or corn, rice, wheat, palm oil, and potatoes. So let's look one by one. When it comes to global production of sugar, which is unfortunately the #1 crop produced on Earth, but of course sugar is in almost everything these days, Brazil, India, and China together represent nearly 2/3 of global sugar production. And then look at maize or corn. Together, China and Brazil represent nearly 1/3 of global corn production. The US is the biggest producer. And then look at rice. China and India together make up more than half of global rice production. Look at wheat. China, India, and Russia make up more than 40% of global wheat production. Look at palm oil. Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand together make up more than 80% of global palm oil production. And Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand are now partner countries of BRICS. And then look at potatoes. China and India make up nearly 40% of global potato production. So now let's look at global meat production. Chicken, pork, and beef make up 88% of global meat production. Chicken is 34%, pork is 34%, and beef is 20%. So in terms of chicken production, the USA is the biggest producer, but the second and third biggest producers are China and Brazil. Together, China and Brazil make up roughly 20% of global chicken production. Let's look at pork. China is by far the world's largest producer of pig meat, representing more than 40% of global pork production. Then there is cattle meat or beef. The US is the world's biggest beef producer, but Brazil and China are the second and third biggest producers of beef. And together they make up around 20% of world beef production. What about eggs? Or as the UN Food and Agriculture Organization puts it, hen eggs, from chickens. Well, there's no competition. China is by far the world's biggest producer of hen eggs, representing 34% of the entire world's production. India makes up 8%. The USA is 8%. Indonesia is 6%. Brazil is 4%. And Russia makes up 3%. So BRICS countries make up more than half of the world's production of eggs. What about seafood? Well, when it comes to global fish production, once again, China is off the charts. The UN FAO divides seafood between capture production and aquaculture production. China alone makes up more than half of global aquaculture production. And then India and Indonesia are the second and third largest. So together they represent more than 70% of global aquaculture production. And then China is also the world's single largest source of capture production of seafood, representing roughly 15%, followed by Indonesia in second place. So together, China and Indonesia make up more than 20% of global capture production of seafood. And finally, let's look at global production of vegetable oils. I already talked about palm oil, how Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, which are now all BRICS partner countries, represent nearly 90% of global production of palm oil. There's also soy oil. China and Brazil are the first and third largest producers, respectively, making up around half of global soybean oil production. China is the third largest producer of canola oil, and Russia is the second biggest producer of sunflower oil. So what's the message that I'm really trying to hit home here? That yes, BRICS makes up now more than 41% of world GDP, but when you look at sector by sector, BRICS is even more important because it makes food for the entire world. It is the breadbasket of the world. And then we can also look at energy. And here we can see how BRICS once again punches above its weight as a very important organization in terms of energy production. If you look at a list of the top 10 oil producers on Earth, half of those countries are in BRICS. The third largest producer of oil, Russia. The fourth largest producer of oil is China. The seventh largest producer is Iran. The eighth biggest producer is the UAE. And the ninth biggest is Brazil. Those 5 countries are all full members of BRICS now. Then if you look at global production of natural gas, once again, you can see how powerful BRICS is. The second biggest producer of gas is Russia. The third biggest is Iran. The eighth biggest producer is China. The 10th biggest is the UAE. The 11th biggest is Indonesia. And the 15th biggest is Malaysia, which is now a BRICS partner state. Of course, climate change is a global problem, especially that countries in the global south have been facing. So let's look at green energy. And here there's just no comparison. China is off the charts when it comes to investment in and installation of renewable energy. China has installed more solar and wind power capacity than the rest of the world combined. And China alone represents more than 80% of global investment in clean energy manufacturing. So once again, I mean, there's just no comparison. China is by leaps and bounds the global leader in renewable energy, in green technology. And the US and Europe are putting heavy tariffs on China because their companies cannot compete with Chinese companies. Finally, let's look at BRICS's position when it comes to global production of critical minerals, which are needed for renewable technologies and manufacturing. If you look at the list of the world's top iron ore producers, you can see that most of them are in BRICS. The second biggest producer of iron ore on Earth is Brazil. The third biggest is China. The fourth biggest is India. The fifth biggest is Russia. The eighth biggest is South Africa. The ninth biggest is Kazakhstan, which is now a BRICS partner. And the 10th biggest is Iran, which is now a full member of BRICS. And then if you look at global production of copper, you can see that there are some heavy hitters in BRICS. China is the world's third biggest producer of copper. Russia is the world's 7th biggest. And Indonesia is the 9th biggest. And we can see the same pattern if you look at global production of nickel, which is a very important mineral for the green transition for renewable energy. Indonesia is off the charts. No country comes even close to Indonesia when it comes to global production of nickel. The third biggest producer is Russia. The 7th biggest producer is China. The 8th biggest producer is Brazil. And the 9th biggest producer is Cuba, which is now a BRICS partner country. Those are some of the most important statistics showing how BRICS is very important in the world. The West would like you to believe that this is an unimportant organization, and because there are so many political differences that it won't make a difference in the world. But first and foremost, BRICS is an economic organization, a forum of global South countries, developing economies that are coming together to try to create new alternatives. They are challenging the dominance of Western economies, and especially they are seeking alternatives to the US dollar. They are trying to de-dollarize, to trade with each other in their local currencies, seeking investments in other currencies, seeking assets that they can hold in the reserves of their central bank so they're not entirely dependent on holding US Treasury securities, US government debt, which also helps to fund the US government. as it wages wars around the world, as it imposes sanctions on 1/3 of countries on Earth. As I mentioned earlier, in 2024, BRICS held a historic summit in Russia in which they endorsed a blueprint that calls for transforming the international monetary and financial system. I have a separate video and article that I published summarizing BRICS's plan. I have linked to that in the description below. If you like the reporting that we do here at Geopolitical Economy Report, please like and subscribe. Please share this. I am Ben Norton, the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report.
Coffee. Follow me.